What is up everyone, it's Saber here and welcome to another Naruto What If. If you end up liking the video, please consider subscribing. It's free and you can take it back at any time and it really helps me out, and this is my third channel, so if you want some more what ifs, go check out my other channels. And with all of the YouTube formalities out of the way, let's get into it. My lady Naruto bowed his head with a knowing smirk. No words were shared as the lady of House Stark gave him a knowing smile and bowed slightly herself. His bright sapphire eyes trailed after her figure, entranced with her curves, wearing mere skin-tight leather breeches with rows of leather ties on the lengths of the legs. Had never looked so sexy on a woman. His eyes followed along her figure as she disappeared down the hall. He sighed, turning away towards the rest of the keep. The events of the last 2 weeks had been nothing short of a burning rush. Fox Company numbers surged to almost 2,000 members of hand-picked men and women by all the battle companions, but not only that, his grandfather Lord Tywin Lannister had appointed him as the Lord Commander of the City Watch and ordered Naruto to be the sole protector of the Red Keep should any riots or sieges take place. He was the first line of defense, and the last line of defense. Fox Company banners were flowing with Lannister and Baratheon. As if the fox belonged with the pride. It was a speedy week with Naruto and co hard at work, removing competition and potential enemies to his rise to power with his bolstered forces. A few lords present in King's Landing had joined Naruto in his secret crusade for the crown. All of this, of course, underneath Joffrey's nose. No, that was too nice a term. More like Joffrey allowed it. The events of his return flashed in the blonde Baratheon's mind. The image of Joffrey's bruised face and broken arm had never seemed so beautiful before. The pain he'd inflicted on his brother was almost obscene, but the failed king needed to know. He was no one's plaything. He wasn't their pawn or knight or rook or septon. He was the player, and Joffrey, well, he got played. Naruto smirked to himself for that clever pun. The days were growing short, but were filling with more productivity than any other day in the last year. 1 year Naruto and Fox Company had fought and warred with the South. 1 year it had been since the untimely death of Lord Eddard Stark. 1 year since the North's rebellion and the crowning of King Robb Stark. This was nothing short of perfect. The peace they felt, the ease they relished in, was almost foreign to the boy and his companions. The war had shaken them, beaten them, imprisoned them, but it was far from breaking them. The greatest battle of the war was at hand, and Stannis was near finished with consolidating his newly reinforced army, with the Stormlands under the Baratheon kings command. 100,000 Stormlanders stood at his back, with thousands more waiting in reserve. Stormlords and their galleys built to withstand the waves and storms of Shipbreaker Bay had joined with the king in the narrow sea, aiding him with the much-needed ships. It would only be a matter of time before he finally mounted an assault that could make or break the Lannister power in King's Landing. Naruto knew better. There was something convoluted going on within the gates of the city, with the defenses of King's Landing being no better than paper against crashing waves. There was another plan in place. Thankfully, he hoped Myra and Bran would have finished their visit to a certain guild within the city walls. On the subject of their walls, they were old and broken. Some watchtowers were still damaged from his father's rebellion all those years ago. Now that he thought about it, his father showed absolutely no care of King's Landing or the surrounding lands. Even with the new defenses and battlements, they were an embarrassment to defense and castle structure. He'd never seen such disgrace, but to rebuild battlements to full working order would take too long and would eat resources that could be used for something else. There had to be a better way to defend the city. Food was still scarce and supplies were running low thanks to Robb's newly enacted warpath into the Westerlands. Naruto frowned. His grandfather thought it wise to leave the Crownlands to combat Robb Stark in the field, going so far as to send the mountain ahead with 1,000 riders and footmen. He sighed and continued his walk through the castle grounds, nodding at the Fox Company pikemen standing guard along the walls and entrances. It was a certainty that Robb had received word of Renly's death, and that could only mean that the alliance was over. Effective immediately, the boy headed up to the walls, boot soles clapping against the stone steps. The city was in full commotion with gold cloaks and Fox Company troops patrolling the streets. Lannister soldiers did the same, but that was all that remained of the Lannister presence in King's Landing. Less than 1,000 men remained to keep the facade of Lord Tywin's power. Naruto could see the horrible truth. The Lannister power remained in just the name and history, nothing more. He shared a few words and gave a few orders here and there, continuing to keep his hold on the defenses of the Red Keep in tip-top shape. War will come to King's Landing real soon, and the forces of King Stannis Baratheon will crash upon the gates like a torrential downpour. Thousands of men and women will die before this is over. That much is certain, but Naruto was confident that his friends will survive till the end. The Blackwater will run red with blood before the battle ends. Prince Naruto, the Handlord Tyrion requests your presence. His squire appeared from behind. Thank you, Podrick. Naruto smiled. I'll be there immediately. Smith, make sure the spears get transferred to the eastern wall with the coast being Stannis's probably assault route will need more weaponry to defend the coast. Yes, Lord. The sergeant took off with an entourage of Fox Company levies carrying spears and bundles of arrows in their arms. Now that's finished, walk with me, Pod. Naruto headed ahead of the rather fat squire. Of course, my lord. Podrick bowed. Has my uncle spoken to you of possible promotions? Naruto asked. You have been most helpful to my family, and such loyalty should be rewarded. Oh, of course, my lord, but with Lord Tyrion all I do is go over reports and deliver messages and pour his wine. Podrick stammered, trying to keep up with the ever-busy prince. Good. Naruto nearly laughed. With my stubby uncle he'd need extra hands to keep his wine glass and chalices filled constantly. My lord. Podrick laughed softly. Silence had fallen the young squire as another pair of sergeants and levies appeared with reports and letters for the prince to sign off and requisition. He was quick with his wrist, flicking the feather pen back and forth. It was almost as if he was the king and not Joffrey, but the prince's question knocked the pain from his thoughts. Would you like to be a knight? Naruto asked without a crack in his voice. It would be a great honor, you know. Podrick looked to the prince's fingers clasped together. Aye, my lord, but Lord Tyrion needs me. Naruto didn't respond and took a wooden ink board and began to write away where they stood, but Podrick could see just the faintest of smiles form on the Baratheon's face. Once he finished writing, he handed the ink board back to the sergeant and motioned for the Pain to walk along. And that is why you're so deserving to become a knight. Naruto smiled. Your loyalty is commendable. Come the end of Stannis' assault on King's Landing, and I'll see to it that you and Brandon Stark are knighted. I can't think of anyone more deserving. And with that the prince left the Pain standing in awestruck wonder. Ah, beloved nephew. Tyrion smiled. I'm glad that you're here to join me. Read it. Naruto's eyes scanned over the letter. Within seconds his eyes sprang from his head. Stannis will be here by nightfall. This is too soon. Ah, what a pleasant surprise. Naruto smiled softly. Any thoughts on defending King's Landing? As the letter says, Stannis will be here by nightfall. I know. Tyrion took a sip of wine and quickly unraveled maps and books about King's Landing. That is too short a time to build onagers and trebuchets. We have ballistae, but it will not be enough to keep over 100,000 men at bay. Agreed. Naruto sighed. We need something that could thin their ranks. The flashier the better. Their morale is horrendously low at this point. Traded from lord to king and from king to another, they must be weary. Exactly my thoughts. Tyrion handed Naruto a cup of wine. Kill two birds with one stone. Thin ranks and break morale. A master stroke. Not entirely. Naruto frowned, but close enough. Enough of that for now. How are your forces? Tyrion asked. Are they sufficient? I helped with choosing the best in the entire royal army. Of course. Naruto smiled. They know who they follow and what their purpose is. Protect the king and protect King's Landing, the two said in comical unison. Tyrion could sense an ulterior motive behind it, but deign from speaking of it. I assume you will be leading the defense of the city. Definitely. I wouldn't have it any other way. Naruto stretched. Have we received word on how and where Stannis was going to attack? Partly. Tyrion took it as his turn to frown. From what you've told us, your uncle Renly, while a fool, had a great plan in place. A two-pronged strike, one from the coast and another from the land itself, but as it is, it's impossible to send an army through the Crownlands. Naruto frowned. Grandfather saw to it to lock the Crownlands and the Westerlands from entrance and exit. True, but look at that king in the north. Tyrion gave Naruto a look. He's broken through quite nicely and is beginning to take a considerable amount of land from us. Bad example. He was already locked in the Westerlands and Crownlands to begin with. Uncle Naruto shook his head. And Robb is stuck in the Westerlands. Aside from the mountains onslaught leaving hundreds of Northmen dead, grandfather has taken it upon himself to move against Robb once again. We all know what happened last time. Robb got lucky. Tyrion shook his head once again. But I will not lie, seeing my father in such a wounded and defeated state had never looked so satisfying. Quiet, uncle, someone might hear. Naruto laughed heartily. The dwarf laughed even harder, sipping his wine as heavily as possible. Don't let someone hear of your indifference. I'll probably soil that good name of yours. Bah, I wouldn't dream of it. Naruto snickered. Their eyes curled, but the moment died soon after. Naruto raised a chalice up to his lips, sipping softly at the alcoholic liquid. Uncle, I know. Tyrion poured himself a full cup. I wish Jamie were here too. It's been an entire year since we'd last seen him. Naruto shook his head, taking massive gulps of wine. Where could he possibly be? My lords. A knock echoed against the door. The door burst open, revealing Myra Bran and two Fox Company levies. Lord Naruto, we have a situation that requires your attention, Myra said with a knowing look. Naruto saw the look in her eyes. This was definitely important. He turned to his uncle only to find the dwarf already shooing him off like a fly. A nice turn of events. Everything had become. The prince rose from his seat, bowing his head to the Lannister and the stalwart Sellsword Braun with wind in his steps. The Baratheon turned and exited the room with his friends at his back. Where are you, Sasuke? Naruto asked worriedly. I haven't heard from you since Storm's End. Just like any other time he tried, he was met with a foreboding silence. Uneasy and near foreign, the absence of Sasuke was beginning to get to the Baratheon that was beside the point. Naruto needed Sasuke's abilities, he needed eyes and ears everywhere like Sasuke always managed to do. Even with 2,000 men under his command, they weren't experienced in sneaking and spying. Naruto, we've succeeded. Bran smirked. Your family isn't as well connected or clever as they like to appear. We've managed to convince the Alchemists Guild to start making wildfire for us instead. Myra dropped her head slightly, whispering, all wildfire reserves and pots have been transferred to our warehouse. Good, we're making progress. Then you two, I want you to start moving the pots to the hidden positions. Understood. The two Fox Company levies bowed their heads and immediately disappeared down the hall. Suddenly his voice dropped when members of House Lannister's military walked by. What of Ser Loras' position? He's getting there. Myra responded, he's Naruto. We've received word that your grandfather has broken through Lord Yon Royce's battle lines. Ser Delran appeared from the other end of the hall. At his sides, two brutish Fox Company retainers stood. The Crownlands have opened up once again, it seems. Naruto narrowed his eyes. Convenient. My uncle and I were just talking about how Stannis was going to attack. So does that mean what I want to think it means? Yes. Ser Delran nodded, his voice dropping to a silent whisper. Once again, Ser Loras will have an easier time leading his forces through the southern Crownlands. He smirked, crossing his arms over his chest. Everything is falling into place nicely. If he moves quickly enough, he'll be here by midnight and Stannis will have no chance. What will you do with him? Bran asked with a raised brow. I'll do what I must. Naruto shook his head. I'll kill him. Remember my talk about the small folk dilemma? I swore I wouldn't forget it. Bran tilted his head. I end Stannis. I gain the support of the people. Naruto smirked. Fox Company has been trusted with the defense of the city, and everyone by now knows I command Fox Company. Walk with me, Naruto said. Suddenly breaking his statement, Ser Delran, send more men to the Mud Gate and the Lion's Gate. I'll also require a small contingent to head into Flea Bottom. What for? Ser Delran gave the prince a confused look. The city guard is lax. They need to be more reliable. He glared out into the distance, and to be more reliable means to find the criminals, thieves and rapers, and kill them where they stand before the siege begins. After a few in-depth talks with the last Lord Commander of the City Watch, we'll need to get rid of those bastards, or else we're going to have a lot of problems on our hands once the siege begins. Naruto added, also, after learning of Sansa and Arya Stark's near rape situation while we were in Tumbleton, I am not taking any more chances with Flea Bottom right away. Naruto. Ser Delran nodded, and as you go, tell Jalabhar that I want him at my tower chambers within the next 2 hours. Naruto called. The defense of the city is paramount. Remember that. With orders issued, the Baratheon felt he was finally coming along with Joffrey cooped up in his room, probably raging with tears. Naruto took it upon himself to rule the kingdom while Tyrion was the official lord and protector of the realm, with Tywin continuing to pursue Robb Stark. Naruto had taken the mantle as unofficial king, using his position to his advantage. Now that we're out of that blasted hallway, we can talk more in depth. On our way to the Alchemists Guild, Naruto sighed softly. Our patrols out in the narrow sea have caught sight of Stormlander war galleys on the southern coast. Bran said they're getting dangerously close to certain areas of our hidden resources. Understandable. Naruto stretched his neck, rubbing the whisker like scars on his cheeks. He's probably probing our defenses, trying to figure out whatever we've got to defend Blackwater Bay. Our weapons, though. Myra frowned. They almost spotted the placements. Are our camps still hidden within the forests? As of now, Myra adopted a thinking pose. Yes, they are, but if the Stormlanders continue to float out here, we're gonna have a big problem. I see. Naruto stopped, turning to the brunette. If they get too close, pull the troops out of the camps and redirect them. With Ser Loras and his reinforcements waiting in reserve, we should just move them into the city. Bran sighed. Why don't we swarm the Baratheon host? We will. Bran. Naruto smiled. He wants to do a classic pincer maneuver. I'll respond in a similar fashion. You've got a plan, don't you? Bran gave Naruto a knowing look. Neither spoke as Lannister men-at-arms walked past them without giving them a thought of a glance. Of course, but I will not discuss it here, Naruto replied. I don't want Lannister knights and retainers overhearing too much of what I have in store. We're not the only ones with spies. I guess we'll have to wait for now. Bran shrugged. Hey, is that Maya and Gendry? I thought they were out recruiting more members. I suppose they're done, Myra asked. That was rather quick. Let's see how much they managed to get us. Good day, brother. Gendry nodded. My lady, my lord, I assume you were successful, Naruto asked. Extremely. Maya smiled. In the chaos of the war, we found a large group of militia roaming the countryside, armed to the teeth, unknowing of who to fight or side with in the war. Gendry Ser warned, and I gave them enough reason to side with us. Almost 300 more men and women have joined the Fox Company. Gods. Naruto smiled. Where are they now? They're with Ser Warren, getting some training done before the big battle. She nodded. What of our position in the city and outlying lands? We're tightening our hold, Naruto replied. Weapons and arrow supplies are steady. How much longer before we head for the endgame? Maya asked with a frown. You know we're playing with fire, right? All of this cloak and dagger might come back to bite us in our arses. Yes, I do. Naruto laughed. That'll mean everything will continue in our favor. Maya, Gendry, Myra and Bran all deadpanned at their prince's whimsical attitude. Why, you do know that that's nowhere near a good thing, right? Yes, I know. I'm not stupid, Naruto chided. I mean, with all my enemies in one place we have less work on our hands. Oh, I see. Maya adopted a thinking expression. Her sapphire eyes twinkled slightly, sending a clear message. I assume one of our biggest opponents has been removed. Not yet, Naruto smiled. I have something else in place. Something vicious, I assume? Myra asked. Something surprising, Naruto smiled. Definitely. That foolish brother of mine crossed the line when he hurt my friends. He lost the right to rule when he left us to die. If I don't take control in time, it'll bring King's Landing down with him. Now that we're done giving status reports, Maya, Gendry, I want the two of you to get the weapon placements hidden along the coast and reposition them on either side of the bay. How will we accomplish all of that in secret? Gendry was astounded. We can defeat thousands of soldiers. We can sneak through entire realms, but I don't think we can move that many siege machines. There are over 2,000 Fox Company men and women, Naruto growled. Find a way, brother, our lives depend on it. Color visually drained from the bastard's face. Maya quickly recuperated and grabbed her half-brother along. Myra giggled slightly, hand falling to the sword at her hip. Bran shook his head, nearly feeling the laughter spread through his body. All right, Naruto sighed, head trailing up to the sky. Bran, come with me to Alchemist's Guild. Myra, check up on the Stark sisters. Tell them where they are going to be during the siege, and if they disagree, Myra asked with a raised brow. I want you to know, you've seen the swords at their hips. They can fight. They're my sisters, Myra, Bran pleaded, giving her glimmering childlike eyes. I want them safe. Oh, don't you dare do that to me, Bran. Myra scowled. Oh, damn it. Fine, if the two find their way onto the battlefield, it's not on my head. All right, Naruto and Bran shot back, hands raised, waving back and forth. Oh, of course, Myra, I was taught never to waste a resource, Myra grumbled as she marched off back into the Red Keep. Myra took a deep breath, heaving the air through her lungs. Naruto and Bran were doing the exciting things while she was stuck practically babysitting before the great battle. It was no matter. Sansa and Arya were important pieces to Naruto's rise to the Iron Throne. While none of them explicitly spoke of the actual plan, they were ambiguous enough to keep the Lannister men-at-arms, spies and knights out of the loop and thrown into their own confusing mess of misinformation. Within 2 weeks they'd managed to shake King's Landing up in more ways than one. Slowly but surely the populace was hearing of Naruto's accomplishments as commander. Some of course were embellished. That was beside the point. Myra and the rest of the battle companions went with Naruto when he attacked Joffrey and broke his arm. Not a single one of them raised a finger, though. They were going to leave the pleasure of breaking Joffrey up to Naruto. Poetic. Myra thought Joffrey scarred Naruto, and the Baratheon was simply repaying the debt. After all, Lannisters pay their debts, no Fox Company levies. Nodded at their commander as she passed their castle patrol, nodding her head softly. Knights bearing the fox head as their heraldry nodded their heads as well. Following behind the levy patrols, her chocolate brown eyes trailed after them, watching them swivel and turn, heading over to the northern side of the castle grounds. She was a bit surprised at how quickly Naruto managed to seize control of King's Landing, or at least the Red Keep. It was almost as if he'd planned for all of this since the start. She continued walking through the halls, climbing flights of stairs, and through winding vermilion halls. She knew the keep like the back of her hand, and sadly there was no quick way to the Stark girl's solar, at least nothing short of climbing the vines that have grown along certain balconies. If her memory was serving her correctly, there were a few specific balconies that bore a bountiful supply of vines that were extremely strong. One was upon the Tower of the Hand, just a floor beneath the hand's chambers. The second was a series of interlocking vines and shrubs that led to a storeroom close to the Queen's solar, and one of the few important ones lead straight to the Stark solar. Thankfully no one has been mental enough to brave the climb and make it to the top except for her. Of course, Myra could remember that night like it was yesterday. Fighting the Ashai assassin wasn't easy work. Climbing to get to Naruto's room in time was definitely not easy work. In hindsight, she really should have taken the stairs. The climb up the side of the Red Keep was not only strenuous, but traumatizing. Such height was definitely meant for the majestic and regal. Quite a few times the woman nearly slipped and fell to her death during her climb. That's probably the only reason why I can think the vines are even still there. She shrugged. Aesthetic reasons, I suppose, since no one can bloody climb them without special training. She sighed, resting her hands against her hips. She finally made it to her destination. Chocolate brown eyes locked with the large Verwood door. Behind it stood one of the two competitors for her lover's heart. Sansa Stark was different from the last time she saw her. A year passes and she's different, walks different, acts different. She brought her arms to her chest, crossing them over one another with a scowl, and barely a week after we arrived Naruto was already eyeing her shamelessly. Here I was thinking we'd be together, princes, and their hormones. Sansa's attitude had also changed. Myra thought carefully. She didn't seem like a helpless little girl, like I'd originally believed her to be. It's interesting, and frankly I Want to know more? Myra released the breath she didn't realize she'd held and knocked on the door. It started silent, barely audible. Oh, I can remember our first confrontation. Since our return, Myra frowned, knocking once again. I nearly skewered her out of frustration. I'm fairly certain she would have done the same to me. Who is it? Arya Stark's voice echoed. Stop bloody knocking. It's Myra Waters, battle companion of Prince Naruto. Say no more. There was a long series of clicks, and soon enough the heavy door swung open to reveal the young Stark wearing an armored tunic with armored breeches. She was smiling slightly and motioned for the bastard to enter the solar. Myra raised a brow at the quick change of emotion but said nothing of it. Once she entered the room, she was immediately surprised by the weapon racks and training dummies set up in the center of the solar. A table nearby had a jug of water and presumably wine on platters. Lemon cakes and tarts waited in numerous numbers. Myra had to give the girls respect for using their Positon to their advantage, but that still didn't explain the armory their room had become. Nevertheless, Myra had a reason for being here, and she and Sansa were going to have a civil talk for once as just themselves. The hell I will, Sansa declared with a red-faced glare. Naruto has been fighting without me and my sister long enough. We can fight. Well, I won't argue with you there, Myra replied, crossing her arms over her chest. Bran and Naruto, though, were adamant that they wanted you two to be with his mother in the hidden chambers, but we can protect ourselves, Arya responded. Myra sighed, shaking her head. I believe you, and I'm certain Naruto does too, but they're just worried of your well-being. Sansa glared, hand resting on the pommel of her sword. Myra was sensing some leftover heat. Sansa clearly had something to say. I still can't believe you're the same kitchen wench that served us that day. Arya, please leave with Lady and Nymeria. I want to speak with Myra alone. Oh, but I want to see this, Arya cried. Leave. She's using an affirmative voice. Myra tilted her head. From what Arya told me, Sansa hasn't believed in Naruto for almost 6 months after he'd left to fight the war. Now that he's back and Joffrey is weak, she thinks Naruto will leave me for her. Oh, I don't think so. The two watched Arya lead the two massive direwolves from the room and shut the door. Sansa rose from her seat and sauntered over to the entrance and quickly locked the door. I apologize, my lady. Sansa frowned. I have not been proper to you. Myra felt that she'd choked on her spit. Excuse me, I should be thanking you for keeping Naruto happy and safe. Sansa shut her eyes and headed back towards the center of the room. All I did was go against everything Naruto had done to keep us safe. I'm certain I jeopardized his plans in some way or another when I decided to get married to Joffrey. I have a question about that. Myra crossed her arms, taking a sip of wine. Are you what? Sansa tilted her head, but her pale skin grew red at the sudden realization. No, I'm still pure. The war has thankfully kept him away from me and continues to keep him away. He's too busy crying about his losses, I hear, Myra said, trying to keep the growing smile from getting any bigger. Rumors of kitchen wenches. Sansa smirked. The redhead took a sip from her own chalice but felt the smile quickly fade. Myra the bastard dropped her own smile when the conversation took a deeper tone. What is it, my lady? How? Sansa asked meekly. How can I move on from him? I've tried turning him into an enemy to take my hate out upon, but I know he's innocent. The first can't harm Joffrey or else I'll lose protection from the queen. I can't hate him and I can't love him. Sansa slowly shut her eyes. It's hard to believe that a year passed. He and I were poised to get married and be the strongest couple in the 7 kingdoms. Things change, Myra whispered. People do too. I was afraid that you'd say that. Sansa sighed painfully. You love him, don't you? Yes, Myra answered quickly. I know you do too. I'd be a fool to lie and say no, Sansa responded, she downcast, taking tiny sips of her wine. Sansa, there may still be time. Myra began, rising from her seat. Time for what? Sansa asked with a tilted head. I can't believe I'm saying this, but there's something we can still do before the battle begins. What did you have in mind? The young Ginger Stark suddenly came to the realization. With glimmering eyes, Myra exhaled, trying to calm her racing heart. Just follow my lead. Time skip. All right, Jalabhar. Naruto nodded. You understand the plan. I'll get to it immediately. The tall Summer Islander bowed deeply. I'll gather my units and move out. Good. Naruto reached out, grabbing the man's forearm. And don't do anything heroic. We need you, Jalabhar. Just rest for a while, and once the city bells toll, get into position. Understood, Naruto. The man was about to leave, but Naruto tightened his grip. I'm serious, Jalabhar, Naruto said worriedly. You and the knights are our family. We'd be lost if you died. I know for a fact that Bran would be devastated if you lost your life. He looks up to you, you know. Jalabhar lowered his head. I know. That is why I don't have the heart to take him with me. Naruto released the exiled prince and rested his knuckles on the war table. Promise me that Brandon won't get hurt. I promise, Jalabhar. The Baratheon took a quick sip of wine. Watch over the companions with you. I will not lose any of you tonight. The large dark-skinned man walked off silently, closing the door. The young prince couldn't help but feel a dark and foreboding feeling in his stomach. Bran looked up to Jalabhar, and he was certain the Stark saw the Summer Islander as another father figure if something were to happen to either of them. Naruto sighed, running a hand through his golden hair. Damn it, Sasuke, where in the 7 hells are you? Naruto growled. I wouldn't have had to Split the battle companions. If you hadn't disappeared. He walked from the war table heading towards one of the balconies. Glimmering eyes scanned the rippling horizon. Blackwater Bay, despite the light slowly dissipating, looked akin to diamonds. He frowned. Before tomorrow's dawn the bay will be filled with Stannis' broken fleet. Before dawn the rocky coast will be drowned in corpses. Naruto glared at the horizon. There was no way in any of the seven hells that Stannis was going to breach their defenses. Bringing his hand to his chin, he adopted a thinking pose. With the report that my grandfather broke through Lord Yohn Royce's battle lines, I can only assume that he's in pursuit of Robb Ser Loras. I pray that you don't take too long on to more personal things. Naruto frowned deeper. Myra and Sansa, damn it, what am I doing? I feel like I'm playing with fire here. Gods, I promised Myra that we could be together. A promise is a promise. No. Enough of this. I get no ravens from Sansa, not a single message. Even before we left King's Landing she didn't even visit me when I was recovering. That's it, I need to speak to her. I need to let Sansa know what's going to happen. I need to end whatever this is. In a wave of pleasure Myra collapsed. Sweat cascaded down her back, drenching her with euphoria. It had been a long time since a woman had the skill to do this to her, and said woman was a virgin no less. Myra fell upon Sansa, breath heavy with a sultry undertone. Tea, that was amazing, Myra whispered with a seductive tone. If I didn't know any better I would have assumed you've had experience. Tea, thank you. The ginger Stark blushed heavily at the compliment. Her cheeks were almost as red as the sweaty locks of hair sticking to her neck. Suddenly the bastard rose from her body, resting her hands on either side of the Stark. Sansa stared at the woman above her, ice blue locked with chocolate brown. Her breath hitched, making her chest shudder beneath Myra's stare. What a cute look, Myra cackled, causing Sansa to blanch in response. No wonder Naruto finds you so beautiful. Are you sure he'll like this? It doesn't seem proper. Naruto has never been one for propriety. Myra giggled. Her chocolate brown eyes trailed along Sansa's bare skin, taking in the image of her soft sweat-covered body. I honestly would have never guessed that you'd have such long legs. Keep saying things like that and I might die. Sansa had suddenly achieved a new shade of red. Myra giggled softly, eyes trailing along Sansa's bare navel. Slowly she brought her head down, taking one of the girl's taut nipples in between her lips. Sansa's back arched as a great moan escaped her pink lips. Wait, stop for a moment, complaining, Myra asked with a raised brow. When the Stark locked with the chocolate orb she nearly had a heart attack. The redhead's eyes nearly popped from her head. No, Jay, just I was joking. Myra collapsed with laughter, nearly falling from the bed. The Stark wasn't amused, raising the blankets to cover her chest. Sansa even went as far as to hurl a pillow at the laughing bastard. And please Sansa, just stick with the plan and we'll have a night to remember. Myra picked herself up, wiping sweat from her brow. Quickly she headed towards the table, pouring herself a cup full of wine. Sansa watched her down cup after cup. Is it normal to be this excited? Sansa asked, sliding from the bed. Yes it is. Myra slithered a smile across her face. Sansa's blush continued to grow as she slipped into her clothes. Just as they'd finished redressing, the bastard handed the Stark a cup. Now drink. Everything feels better. Drunk. The girl took the cup and immediately began to sip. For a moment the alcohol stung, but after a while it disappeared and began to flow like water. I've overheard Lord Tyrion saying something similar. Sansa piped. Well, he's always drunk. That's why he's always happy. The bastard lover laughed. She sighed softly. And now all that remains is to wait. Naruto stood before the door, sweat building on his brow. He'd run into Arya along the way and was told that Myra was talking with Sansa in private. In all honesty, he didn't know what to think of this. He'd sent Myra to simply talk to the two Starks, not engage in full conversation or possible interrogation. Well, Naruto thought once more. He didn't explicitly say she couldn't converse with the Starks. Oh, what is he doing? The blonde Baratheon threw his palm to his forehead in frustration. Sweat drenched his hand in an instant. Well, there's no use in waiting any longer. Naruto took a deep breath, pressing his sweaty palm against the door handle. He was tentative for some reason. His senses were on edge, fully expecting something horrible to have happened, but once he pushed he found that the door wouldn't budge. Naruto frowned, pressing his weight against the door, and immediately got worried. If they're just talking, why lock the room? I'm really clicked. Naruto's ears perked. Immediately the boy backed away, hand resting on the pommel of his arming sword. He stared at the door with a bit of worry spread across his face. Suddenly the door swung open, revealing an empty room with a few empty chalices. Puddles of wine were dashed across the table and floor, with empty cups lying on the floor. The bed was undone, linens and blankets lying askew. Naruto could only assume the worst. Myra was a spy, and he was certain she had some enemies still lying about the Red Keep. If Myra's own skills were of any merit, he couldn't even fathom the skill the rest of her spy companions could muster. There was no sign of struggle when he entered the empty room. If her enemies had come and taken them, they were indeed the best bloody spies he'd ever seen. Slowly the Baratheon drew his blade, bringing about 6 inches of the blade to be seen. He ventured deeper into the room, coming across one of the bedside tables, scanning the image of empty wineskins and crumb-covered plates. Sansa and Myra Must have had a feast while I was planning our defense. Wait, what is that? Immediately the Baratheon shot around, sword in hand. The bright and freshly forged arming sword glimmered beneath the light of the setting sun. What he saw though sent shivers up and down his spine. Shock took over and the grip he held over his sword diminished. Within seconds the blade fell free from his grasp, clanging and ringing against the stone tile floor. I was wondering when you'd come along, Naruto. He shuddered against her breath. It tickled with a strange warmth, sending his heart to soaring heights. He could feel her arms snake around him, clasping him in a soft yet vice-like grip. It was Myra. Without question she placed soft kisses against his neck, sliding her hands to the latches of his armor. All of this while Sansa watched. The Stark had a blank expression, almost impossible to read. Myra wasn't playing. The girl's hands unclipped his cape, letting it fall to the floor, and immediately unclasped his pauldrons, letting them crash against the stone tiles as more articles of armor fell from his body. Sansa's face descended into different shades of crimson. It wasn't long before he was free of armor, standing before the two women in nothing but his gambeson and leather breeches. Somehow in the sensual ecstasy Myra had managed to remove his boots as well. Blue eyes scanned the room, expecting all of this to be some sort of trick. He came here wanting to speak with Sansa, not get sexually aroused. Wait, Myra, Sansa whispered, shutting every lock on their door. Let me help. His sapphire eyes sprang from his head as his heart sprinted. His body tensed when Sansa slid the garments from her body, leaving a stylized, obviously sewn by Sansa's hand chemise. It was silky and flowed down to her knees, covering much of her body from sight. His throat dried immediately. Eyes trailed up and down her lengthy legs, admiring every inch of her cream-like porcelain skin. Despite her blushing face, it did nothing to detract from the 16-year-old's vibrant ice blue Tully eyes. He was shaking, having never seen Sansa like this before. Naruto, she whispered, wrapping her arms around his neck. Don't be afraid. Myra's arms slithered down, rummaging against his belts and breech laces. Naruto began shaking as a sudden cold wrapped around him. He could feel his undergarments tightening as he grew. It wasn't long before the virgin of the three took notice, tracing her right hand down his chest and upon his growing member. Naruto shuddered at the touch. What is going on? Naruto's eyes slowly shut, relishing in Sansa's soft hands wrapping around him. His heart punched, his chest beating with Sansa's pumping action. Pete, please someone explain. Don't worry, my prince. Myra kissed his cheek, turning him to face her. Before the battle, let us be together. All the Baratheon could do was nod dumbly and follow after the brunette. Sansa followed behind, hands pressed against his shoulders. Sansa couldn't help but feel warm all over. She knew he was strong, but feeling the muscles through the padded gambeson only seemed to make her weak. In her knees she peeked over the tall Baratheon's shoulder and noticed Myra slipping from her own robe and chemise. Unbeknownst to her, she was licking her lips. It seems we're moving ahead of schedule. Oh, you dirty woman, Myra. Sansa quickly turned Naruto around to find his scarred face bore nothing less than a dreamy, bashful look. Poor teen looked brain dead. She threw her hands against his chest, untying the various laces and straps with near perfection. Feeling her mind was on fire. It wasn't long before she'd completely thrown his gambeson in some random direction, revealing his scarred muscled torso beneath. Before Sansa could say anything, Myra's arms wrapped around his body in an instant. Now my lady. Myra's voice was playful. We mustn't get ahead of ourselves just yet. But look at him, she cried, crossing her arms over her chest. He looks like he's in a trance. I'd like to say that I'm extremely confused, Naruto piped, pushing away from Myra's arms. I came here to speak with Sansa, and here I find that the two of you are trying to rape me. Honestly. Myra slipped from all of her garments, sliding into the bed. Slowly she traced her fingers along her brown skin, raising a leg to her chest, revealing her ripe and beautiful cunt. Naruto's heart nearly stopped when Sansa started doing the same. I doubt you'd call this rape, but he tried his best to formulate sentences. Why, what are we doing? We're about to fuck, Sansa replied with a cheeky smirk. Sansa. Naruto's eyes were as wide as plates. Why your words? Why are you? I need a drink. Sansa looked to Myra, and she looked back to her, the both of them deadpan at Naruto's response. As sad as it was, the two of them expected this. Sansa was supposed to be the innocent little bird, and Myra was his lover. Now that the two of them were doing this all so suddenly, they were certain that any more Naruto might actually die from shock. The nude women watched the Baratheon drink straight from the jugs of wine. Sansa raised a brow as he gulped through jugs of alcohol, all without stopping for breath. This was almost a complete turn-off. She turned to see what Myra was going to do, but found that the bastard was laying in the bed staring at the Baratheon's muscled back, brown eyes tracing over his striated muscles, trailing her eyes down. Sansa realized that Myra was pleasuring herself, obviously waiting for him to pay them attention. Are you serious? The Stark asked worriedly. Quite, Myra moaned softly. He's drinking now. He's a lot like his father in that respect. Well, I'm not waiting any longer. Sansa shot from the bed, throwing her legs over as bare as her name day. The girl rushed over to Naruto, taking the jugs of wine from his hand and slamming it to the table. Sansa, what are you doing? He growled. I was drinking that. The Stark stood her ground, raising a brow to his face. He reached for the jug, but the naked woman slapped the hand away, sliding the wine behind her. You're going to be leading the defense of the city in just a few hours. Take some time to relax and soil your honor. Naruto replied, leaning against the table. No, I can't do that to you, Sansa. I love you, but my heart belongs to Myra, as it always had. I made a promise to protect you and your siblings to Rob before we left Winterfell. I can't break it. You're married to my brother. I can't do it. Sansa looked over to Myra to see the woman was sitting up against the headboard. Her brown eyes were examining the situation with a calculating glimmer. This wasn't expected. I've promised Bran to protect you and Arya, Naruto said, rubbing his temples. When I rotted in the dungeons, bleeding, suffering, and writhing with agony, I promised your father that I would protect you, honor, body and soul. Now that you're married to Joffrey, he's probably already taking your maidenhood. You're not mine any longer. Sansa, not now, not slap you. Shut up this instant, Sansa cried, searing hot handprint still engraved against his scarred cheek. Enough with your honor, enough with your undying will to protect me, enough for just one night. Just Sansa. Myra rose from the bed, eyes filled with worry. Wait, no, I have to tell him. Sansa looked meek before Naruto, bearing none of the bravado she'd held just before. Tell me what. He rose from the table, looking between the two women. What are you two on about? Joffrey didn't force me into marriage, Sansa responded, and Joffrey and I haven't consummated our marriage either. I'm still a maiden. Is this true? Naruto whispered, hand rising to cup Sansa's cheek. But it's all true, Naruto. Myra smirked, coming to rest a hand on Sansa's waist. She's still a virgin. But what about the marriage? Naruto asked, trying his best to come to terms. What about all that I was told? Our marriage is still nullified. Sansa frowned, but Joffrey was so consumed with jealousy of you, he rode off to war the second you'd left for your personal fortress. I talked him into marrying me because I thought I could save my father and you. I do not profess to know what you feel, but I know I love you. When I saw my brother return with you, Sansa felt her eyes begin to water. For a year I hear nothing from you or my brother. For a year I live in fear of the royal army. For a year I miss you, cry for you, wishing you were here to hold me like so many dark nights we shared together. When I saw the two of you return, I knew that I didn't deserve you. A year passes, and I have forgotten all you've done for me and my family. A year passes, and I've done nothing to show my appreciation. All I ask, accept me, Naruto. Sansa, and I spoke of this before you came. The bastard smiled. I'm fine with it, but what if she gets pregnant? Naruto asked worriedly. What if she gives birth to a bastard? Then marry her. You can easily force Joffrey to marry Marjorie. We still need to talk about that as well, Myra replied with a smile. Also, Sansa is the highborn between me and her. But what of you? I can't leave you. I made a promise that I would be yours, Naruto asked with eyes even larger than before. What if you get? Oh, stop whining like a kitchen wench and let us fuck you already, Myra shouted, impatience growing with each word that fell from the Baratheon's lips. It's not every day a man doesn't have to pay to fuck two women. He shot back, arms raised in defense. All right, but we're going to talk about this after the battle. His reply was meek, but his response was the very thing they'd hoped for. Once again his breeches tended, but they could see the member push against his laces, slowly loosening the breeches on his own. The two girls looked at one another, pulling the Baratheon along, pushing him into the bed. Myra went to quick work, pulling his breeches down, letting his member to stand fully erect. The sun was fleeting, and if they were going to have some real fun, they were going to have to be quick with the foreplay. Myra, Naruto moaned the moment he felt her lips wrap around the head, lips softer than silk. The prince shot his hips forward, nearly choking the bastard in the process. Before he could moan out, Sansa's lips he hadn't kissed in more than a year met with as it exploded throughout his body, filling him with a tingling electricity. His tongue shot forward, battling with Sansa's. All the while Myra continued, taking his member between her lips. She slurped and slobbered all over him, even spitting on him, before continuing as she was before. In his mind all he could think was nothing short of fire between Sansa's lips and Myra's tongue. He knew he was going to die. He groaned against her actions, relishing the feeling as she took him deeper into her mouth. Well, Myra smirked, pumping his member. Are you prepared for the main course? There were times when the Stark would wander, thinking of how everything had changed, be it for better or for worse. He was always thinking and rather confused. They had a good thing happening in King's Landing, far better than when his father was still alive. He frowned. He knew he shouldn't say such things, but he couldn't deny the truth. While his father did a good thing for the time, this interesting turn of events had been the most exhilarating time of the Stark's life. He learned to fight, learned to kill, and even found love. The auburn-haired Stark watched the woman walk barefoot against the waves of the Blackwater Bay. She'd just returned from her mission with Gendry. The Stark felt that she was completely oblivious to his look. Sure, she was a few years older than him, but he'd never felt so attracted to a woman before. Her short cropped hair and thick lips only seemed to make his heart race with each passing second in her presence. Whenever she looked at him, he could feel his heartbeat heavier. Her chest was voluptuous with wide hips, she had slender legs, and such beautifully smooth skin, but sadly the Stark felt he was too young for her. Maybe in the beginning when they were in Tumbleton she showed small ounces of attention. The Stark didn't know how she felt of him now. For the last 6 months they'd been together. They talked, fought, and bled together, and now the only time they had the closest thing to peace in the last month she hadn't given him the time of day. He was worried that he'd done something wrong when in fact it was the exact opposite. Maya watched him, blue eyes hidden behind her bangs. She looked at him with wanting eyes shimmering as bright like the surface of the bay. He was strong despite his age, he was tough despite his age, he was so many things despite the age, and Maya couldn't help but admire him. Even though she tried to change her personality, Brandon Stark still would not openly tell her how he felt with the new purpose. With her brothers and sisters in arms, she'd chosen to leave her lusty personality behind for a more respectful and commanding one. She was many things in the Vale, traveling back and forth across the rocky lands and mountainous terrain. Maya mused. She was a guide leading trains of mules. At one point she was even a knight's lover, giving her maidenhood to him in hopes of marriage. She frowned. She was always quick to love those who would never love her, truly love her. Maya felt like she was dying inside, watching the Stark from the corner of her eye. When Michael took her maidenhood he tried to keep contact with her, but she knew their romance would not move past what it was. She was a bastard and he was highborn. She knew it wouldn't be long before he would be knighted, and yet she fancied the thought of a future. She knew it was false, and yet she put herself in that position. Heartbroken and lost, she found herself slowly falling for the Stark that was so much younger than her. He protected her with little regard for his own life. At times he always watched her, and it helped that Summer was practically in love with her. He always sniffed her, kissing her hands with large lapping licks. She was slightly disappointed that Summer was not here with the two of them. He was probably playing with Lady Sorsha. Maya shuddered softly, imagining how the two massive animals played. Summer managed to grow to the same height and size as Lady Sorsha in the last year, almost even allowing Bran to ride on his back, and once again the bastard's thoughts rested on a nobleman that she has no chance with. Are you ready? Asked Sansa. Naruto shivered as cold winds brushed along his nude back. It'll hurt at first. Sansa gave the Baratheon a meek look, turning to face Myra, almost as if she was asking for the woman's consent. Myra smirked and gave the Stark all the affirmative she wanted. Sansa gave Naruto a silent, nervous nod. Her arms rested at her sides as the Baratheon spread her legs. Their foreplay had outlived its service, and now they were fully prepared for the main course. Myra rested Sansa's head in her lap, reaching out to lead Naruto to the Stark's nether regions. He was tentative, feeling her juices ooze free from her virgin opening. It flowed about, covering his member. It was warm to the touch, tingling his nerves. He was so close. Myra's left hand reached out, tracing along Sansa's cunt, slowly spreading the lips to reveal the tight hold the Baratheon had to spread. He could see the hymen, the entrance, just waiting for him. It's now or never. Naruto groaned, pressing the head against Sansa's entrance, shredding her hymen. The woman squealed, throwing her arms around his back. She clenched her jaw, feeling tears trickle down her cheeks. It was an amazing sensation, filling her body with both pain and a tingling electricity like lightning. The shock exploded all around her body, sending shivers up and down her spine. No thoughts, only passion. The Stark dug her nails into his back as he spread her walls. He stopped when he'd come at least an inch. Sansa shuddered at the feel. Never had she felt something like this. Nervous and cold, the Stark cracked her eyes open, only to be met with the glowing sapphire blue orbs her Baratheon lover had for eyes. Suddenly her eyes shot open. This felt insane. The closer his body pushed against her, the more the pressure built, and the more the pleasure built. It was strange. It felt like something was throbbing within her, like a separate heartbeat. Just as she felt the pressure couldn't get any greater, she could feel his body pressing against her. Sansa, he lowered his head, placing soft kisses against her neck. It only gets better from here on out. Arya blanched, her arms rested against the crunnels of the battlement, watching over the stony coast of Blackwater Bay. The night had fallen, and the sky was black with the stars glimmering in the night. On the coast, her brother was courting a woman with flowers and pointless things. Arya had to say that the girl had an interesting choice in attire and hairstyle, but the fact that her brother decided that finding love is a thing on his list made her want to puke. She was happy her brother had found someone that would like him, or maybe even love him, but why look for love now? Arya scowled. She wanted to be with Naruto in Fox company, fighting like she'd been training with Sirio Farrell to do for a year. She'd swung needle and wooden training swords to near perfection, to the point the Bravosi felt that they didn't need his help anymore, that their lessons were done if the first sort of Bravos believes that to be true, then how else can someone like her display her skills? All she wanted was to walk in the footsteps of Visenya Targaryen, and Nymeria of the Rhoynar. Arya found Tommen bearable and Gendry quite attractive, but she preferred needle and armor. She'd prefer a shield and mail over a lord or knight or prince or lover. She frowned once more, watching her brother press his lips against the woman. They embraced each other like lost lovers, making the Stark truly gag 7 hells. Arya cackled, "Come Nymeria, let's go have some fun before the battle." "And that's how we escaped Storm's End," Lady Tarina declared, slamming her tankard into the table. Lannister men and royal army troops jumped at the sudden action. Horse soldiers and squires cheered for the battle companion's story, almost begging for more. Lady Tarina released a powerful guffaw, shouting for more wine, much to Ser Delran and Lady Brienne's surprise. Lady Sorsha and Summer rested at her sides like shepherd dogs in the Field's Fox Company was easily distinguished by their more orange and white armor. In this large open-air tavern, men and women laughed and drank together, sharing their stories from the war. Of course, many people were curious of Fox Company's exploits in the South. The newer members had heard of their heroics against the Reach/Stormlands Alliance and wanted to hear the stories from those who were actually their Lannisters, shared their stories of their time fighting the North. There was an interesting story of how a Lannister levy witnessed the near death of Lord Tywin Lannister at the hands of Naruto's friend, King Robb Stark. Lady Tarina watched each and every man, examining their eyes and body language. While she was no guru when it came to reading people, when men were drunk the task became a lot easier. It was no matter. They had a battle coming soon, and if the Black Night they had tonight was any indication, this battle will be great. Many of these men and women will not live to see the dawn break across the sky. Tarina frowned, sipping at her wine, taking in the image of Bronn, Lord Tyrion's personal sellsword and former Lord Commander of the City Watch. Before Naruto was placed, the sellsword nodded at the woman and took a few tankards from some shit-faced levies. Brienne raised a brow at the sellsword and immediately scowled when he winked. A cheeky bugger he was. Ser Delran, though, could already sense the awkward tension building between the men and women before he could make a move to calm the tension. Any effort was thrown out the proverbial window. In an instant, all heads turned to see Sandor Clegane, commonly referred to as the Hound. His stumped left arm and shield eternally strapped to his arm had become almost as much of a defining feature as the burn marks spread across his face. He spared no one a look, glance, or smirk. Speeding past the growing Croat, he stole another levy's tankard, and immediately went to gulping the contents like he was parched in the sands of Dorne. "I'd like to ask Lady Tarina," Sandor chided through clenched teeth. "Who do you really serve?" Sorsha and Summer looked up, dark looks across their faces. The tiger bared her teeth while Summer hunched his massive back, preparing to launch forward. Tarina, though, quickly lowered her hands and rubbed the 2 animal companions behind their ears. Almost immediately the 2 calmed, lowering to the ground. Once more levies released breaths they didn't know they were holding. "I fight for my Prince." Tarina smirked. "I fight for Naruto." Has Sandor smirked, gulping at his wine. "I like that answer." Ding dong, ding dong. The tavern sat silent for gods know how long. Men and women stared at one another without even the slightest breath breaking the stillness. The woman could see beads of sweat, despite the rippling cold, form on everyone's brow when the bells tolled. "The battle begins." Her chocolate brown eyes trailed over to her oldest friend and nodded. "Well then." Ser Delran rose to his feet. "To arms, boys and girls, it's time to defend this city." Maya gasped, cheeks burning like fire. Brandon stared at her with glowing cheeks. "I've been wanting to do that for months, ever since I first laid eyes on you, but I'm a bastard." Maya backed away, feet swishing against the crashing water of the bay. "I don't care." Bran reached out, pulling her arm towards him. "I don't care, I'm too old for you," she replied, coming up with excuses. "Like I said." He leaned forward, pressing his lips against hers. "I don't care." Maya's heart raced. She couldn't believe this. Her hands slowly traced to the boy's face, cupping his cheek. She wanted to say something more, but Brandon kissed her once again. Maya smirked against the action, feeling his tongue pressing against her lips, begging for entrance. Ding dong, ding dong. The 2 quickly broke, staring at the massive bell towers of the Red Keep. Their hands subconsciously landed at the handles of their swords, but the 2 knew what those bells meant. "It's time. Are you ready?" Naruto Sansa asked, throwing her garments as Myra tightened her corset. "The bells have rung." He was hesitant, turning back to face her. Her face was glowing almost like a shimmering diamond. "Sansa, don't worry about us." Myra beat him to it. "We'll be fine, I promise." "As do I." Naruto took Sansa's hand, kissing the back of it. "We'll return, and please Sansa, make sure Arya stays with you when the battle begins." The 2 warriors of the Fox Company's battle companions took off to leave the room. Sansa cried out for her blonde Lover Naruto. Sansa smiled. I have something I haven't told you yet, Arya. Bran and I have it. I'm certain Rickon and Rob do too. What are you talking about? Sansa Naruto asked with a confused expression. Sansa smiled. Take Lady with you and I'll show you what I mean. But Lady isn't combat experienced. Naruto was interrupted by Sansa's soft pink lips. Just trust me on this. Sansa beamed. Ours is the fury, is it not? And with that the Baratheon exited the room, shutting the door as calmly as possible, leaving Sansa alone. Once again her eyes trailed off to the dark coast. Finding nothing along the coast, it was no matter. Everything will change after tonight. Everything. Time skip. I just want you to know that I'm happy you came to see me before the battle. Cersei smiled, slowly sipping at her goblet. I'm glad we are able to talk more. Ever since the war began, Naruto wanted to feel bad, but all he could hear was the soft slurps of wine coming from his mother. Naruto rolled his eyes. Mother, can you for the life of us stop drinking wine for at least a moment? Her green eyes glimmered with a vengeful mirth that sent shivers up and down the boy's spine. You should know better than to get between a lioness and her wine. I could have sworn it was between her pride. Naruto replied with a cheeky smirk. Oh ho. Cersei mocking laughed, gulping at her drink. Just because you've survived for a year at war you think yourself clever. All Naruto could do was laugh, taking a sip of his wine, a cup of Dornish red and a quick bite of tart. Naruto slipped his hands into his gloves, resting his hand against the handle of his newly forged bastard sword. He quickly turned for the door when the horns of Fox Company began to bellow. Before he could leave though, his mother grabbed him for one last conversation. Look at you. Cersei smiled, eyeing the blonde up and down. Naruto stayed silent, seeing the worry wrought across her features. Year I don't see you and you've grown taller than me. I still can't believe it. I know, mother. The Baratheon laughed. I'm sorry I couldn't write back. During the later parts of the last year we were holed up in Tumbleton and we didn't have much time to know. No, Naruto. Cersei laughed, embracing her son. I understand. I just wish I was there to see you off last year. Silence had befallen the two. To think after his first war my son would become a distinguished war hero. I am beyond words right now, my sweet. The Baratheon blushed, a light pink tinge at her words. Thank you, mother. Remember your words. Naruto. Cersei's green eyes glowed vibrant in the dim solar. Hear me roar? He asked, half expecting her to speak with her Lannister heart. Surprisingly, he was left like a gaping fish. No, my son, ours is the fury. Now go and show that fool Stannis the fury of our house. The bells tolled with an annoyance he hadn't heard since his youngest sibling Tommen had been born. That was years ago. The entire keep was in uproar. Men and women ran back and forth through the Vermilion Hall. Some were servants and handmaidens running for cover, while others were dignified knights and Fox Company levies. Through it all, Naruto could only see red. Anticipation grew with each passing heartbeat. This was the battle that would change the course of the war. While Rob's victory at Harrenhal was great, Naruto was certain the Blackwater would change. Westeros's boots clapped against the stone steps as he tightened the belts of his bracer. Bran and Myra fiddled with their armor pieces, tightening belts and laces. Summer and Lady seemed anxious as well. The two were encased in boiled leather armor with steel plates in strategic areas. The prince gave the two direwolves a loving look, whilst Summer was calm and collected. Lady was practically bouncing on her paws with excitement, finding their armor exquisite. The prince looked to his own armament for Naruto. Despite the importance of his breastplate and pauldrons, his left bracer was the most important piece of armor, for it held Heartsbane within it. While he had the Valyrian steel weapon, he didn't want to bring out all of his cards too soon. That is why he had a new bastard sword forged not too long ago, affectionately called Fox Claw. The sword might have seemed unremarkable, but it was at least half the weight and twice as strong as swords of similar size. Naruto hoped that he wouldn't have to use Heartsbane at all anytime soon. Call it wishful thinking, but Naruto truly believed that he could win without using his abilities either. Stannis was floating into a trap. Well, there goes my shadow clone. Naruto smiled softly. At least I sent one to talk to with my mother, who knows how distraught she's been throughout all of this. Are you ready, Myra? Asked Lady with a small smile, rubbing the direwolf behind the ear. We're gonna make history tonight, girl. Across the Great Hall, Naruto caught sight of Sansa Stark, the beauty of King's Landing. She was accompanied by a cadre of handmaidens and one very tall woman donning bronze armor. Behind them, a grumbling teen with a skinny blade marched along with a direwolf in tow. Arya was clearly not happy about this turn of events, and despite begging mercilessly, Naruto had denied her any chance of joining the battle. It was too dangerous, he said. Lord Naruto. Sansa bowed softly. I will pray for yours and Fox Company's victory tonight, and thank you for having Lady Brienne of Tarth protect me and my sister. She'll be more than enough. Naruto bowed his head softly, nodding at the tall woman dressed in bronze armor. While I trust Lady Sansa and Lady Arya to follow my orders, I trust you more, Brienne. Make sure she and her sister stay with the noble women. They are a troublesome pair. Ever since they've learned how to fight, I'll watch over them, my lord. Brienne bowed her head quickly. I only ask that you save Stannis for me. Of course, Brienne. Naruto laughed heartily. Well, now the horns are blaring louder and louder. It's time, uncle. Brienne, my ladies, farewell for now. Fox Company to the Mud Gate. Naruto roared. Orange-clad warriors and red and gold armored levies cried out a collective huzzah. It wasn't long before Naruto was joined by at least 100 men and women rushing through the vermilion halls of the Red Keep. Boots and ringing chainmail sung in the hallowed halls. Just as Naruto came to the main gate, the grand doors of the Red Keep sprang open, revealing the reserve cavalry of Fox Company. The night was dark, clouded, and frightful catapults were loading and bending under their weight across the red walls. The bell tower sung with deafening pitch, calling for the city's defenders for the climax. Despite the formations and set patrols, the Red Keep's courtyard looked akin to a peasant's barnyard. Boulders were carted along with ballistae craned up to the parapet. Sir-worn Naruto cried. Lord Naruto, the Hedge Knight called back. The cavalry has assembled. Lord, we're just waiting for the order. Bran ran off, untying 3 horses. Cavalry of Fox Company consisted of mounted men at arms bearing dark orange and black armor and cloaks. There were enough to rush the infantry of Stannis' coastal attack, but there weren't any other gates that allowed a quiet flanking maneuver. For that he sadly had to wait on Ser Loras and the forces of House Tyrell and the Reach. Naruto frowned and nodded at the battle companion, clearly worried by his posture and shaking expression. Good, split your force and head to the Mud Gate to support the backbone of our defenses. Naruto called. Myra, you stick with Ser Jared. Alright, last line of defense again. Myra questioned Naruto. You know I can help. Myra, we went over this. Naruto shook his head. Remember your placements, Ser Warn. Where are Maya and Gendry? Last I saw they were already at the Mud Gate helping rocks and boulders get into more accessible places for the ballistae and catapults. Alright. Naruto took the reins from one of the horses. Bran unhitched and quickly mounted. Bran, you're with me, and make sure you keep your helmet on this time, Uncle Tyrion. Naruto crossed his arms over his chest. What happened to the Royal Navy? I concocted a special plan with the help of the Grand Pyromancer here. The dwarf responded indignantly. I heard from my agents that you've paid the Pyromancer Guild a visit too. I've done my fair share of dealings. Naruto stayed quiet. I can only guess what your plan is. Oh, do tell. Tyrion laughed, trying to ease the moment. Actually no, don't ruin the surprise. Bran asked, raising a brow. Enough surprises for one day. For once I'd like a decent answer, but that would ruin all the fun. Old friend. Naruto laughed. Across the parapet, a contingent of 50 Fox Company archers were stationed. Each and every one followed Jalabar and Bran. Naruto rested his steel gauntlet upon the stone merlin, watching the cold waters of the Blackwater rush. The moon was high, glittering the horizon with a white tinge of beauty. Taking a deep breath, the Baratheon took a moment to take in the sight before the night will drown in fire and blood. He wanted to remember this wondrous sight. Glimmering waters rushing against the stony coast as winds picked up from the east. Stannis was lucky. Naruto glowered. The winds were on the Baratheon king's side, ensuring his assault from the coast would come sooner than anticipated. Sapphire blues trailed towards the south, watching the forest leaves rustle in the cold breeze, dark and foreboding with clouds blocking the moon from sight. Naruto wasn't sure if Ser Loras would make it in time or if Ser Loras had encountered Stannis' land assault force ahead of time. Will we have any reinforcements? Tyrion asked, resting his hand against the stone merlin. As far as I know, Stannis has well over 100,000 men at his disposal, maybe even more. We need not worry of that for now. Naruto replied, I sent a raven to grandfather imploring him to return to King's Landing as soon as possible. Would he answer? Tyrion asked once more. My father isn't one to respond simply because someone asks. Even if he trusts you, he must have something to gain from this. All we can do now is hope he makes it in time. Naruto sighed. For now let us worry about the battle at hand, and then we can worry about family politics after we win. Tyrion gave his nephew a smile. You're certain that we can survive this? Of course, uncle. Naruto smiled back. Fox Company can do anything. Mighty confident in your army, aren't you, brother? Naruto and Tyrion quickly whipped their heads towards the source of the voice. Joffrey, what are you doing here? A king fights with his men, does he not? The bastard king responded indignantly. I thought I told you to stay in your quarters during the battle. Naruto glared. I can't let you die and explain what happened to mother. I'll be fine. Joffrey glared back. Naruto narrowed his eyes. Blue eye reeds trailing behind the Baratheon king. A contingent of 50 men who wore black-colored Lannister armor started filing through and about the defensive positions. Who are they? You have a personal company. I have my own. Joffrey smiled cheekily. These, among many others, were a part of the battle for Crack-Claw Point. Didn't you lose that battle? Naruto did his best not to laugh. That scar across your face is a perfect reminder of that fact, and that matters. Why? Joffrey clenched his fists. I am the king. I am to fight alongside my men and lead them. Naruto looked in the bastard's eyes, crossing his arms over his chest in defeat. Fine, if you want to actually die this time, then by all means go right. Don't slander his grace's name to his Lord Tywin Lannister and Lord Tyrion Lannister. The true hand of the king and the acting hand have both granted me full permission and unlimited power to defend this city, so I choose who and what will be present. Naruto growled menacingly. I could kill you where you stand, and I would still have the complete loyalty of the men present. Your relationship to the king means nothing to me, so stand in line and follow my orders to explicit detail or die by my sword here and now. Joffrey's eyes widened and unknowingly took a step back. Images of Naruto's ferocity 2 weeks prior. Naruto turned to men and women present. Here we stand at the precipice of victory or crushing defeat. If you want victory, then follow my orders, and we will all live to tell the tale. I do not care for your allegiance or what you might think of me. All that matters now at this moment is if you are willing to follow my explicit orders that could and will save your bloody lives through the night and to the break of dawn. Useless heroics will not be tolerated, mindless actions will not be tolerated, and most of all, insubordination will not be tolerated. My brother King Joffrey of the House Baratheon may be the king of our 7 kingdoms, but I am the defender of this city, so my word is the law. You will listen to. Naruto drew his sword, garnering a few cries and affirmations from the thousands of Fox Company levies and retainers, scaring a few of the Lannister retainers in red and the black-clad warriors beneath Joffrey. Men, women, brothers and sisters beneath our banners, fight alongside me and we'll send the burning stag back to his hole with the red bitch between his legs. Joffrey watched the crowd roar in approval, laughing and cheering his name. The blonde king walked dejectedly, completely unnoticed by his men and the knights present. The night was too dark. The king surmised they simply couldn't see him well. Joffrey looked out to the bay, watching the clouds writhe and reshape along the horizon. Men and women cried out his brother's name and screamed victory in quick repetition. He gripped the stone merlin, doing his best to hold back the tears welling in his eyes. He couldn't afford to look weak and shut them, feeling the beating pain against his eyelids as the cheers and cries continued like beating drums. The bastard's scar began to burn. It burned like the day. The scar was nothing but a festering cut across his face. He leaned against the stone merlin, heart racing within his chest. Hooves rushed past him, tearing into the dirt, kicking mud and blood into his face. He was there at crack claw point, watching hundreds of men tear each other apart. He was back on the field, fearful of what was to come. Joffrey, a hand rested on his ornate lion's head. Spalders, are you all right? You've fallen silent. All of a sudden Joffrey turned to the man, and green emeralds met with azure sapphires. What he saw sent shivers up and down his spine. Blonde hair fell into a mess, unbrushed and wild. Naruto looked at his brother with a face of worry, an expression that was all too foreign for the king to fathom. Joffrey saw the scars he'd never intended, but what he truly saw that made him freeze with fear. He saw Robert Baratheon. Suddenly anger rushed through the bastard's body like a fire spreading through the wilderness. He shot his arm away, gaining a confused look from his brother. I'm all right, Joffrey cheekily replied, face devoid of worry and fear. Just be prepared for the moment when I strike down Uncle Stannis. Naruto didn't seem convinced, but nodded anyway. We'll see about that, Joffrey. Just remember to follow my orders, and you might just live long enough to torture innocent animals. Go to hell, Joffrey snickered. But Naruto was right. Joffrey shook his head, clenching his fists until he was certain he was drawing blood. The Baratheon scion was always right when it came to the matters of warfare. This entire war was a testament to that obvious fact. He watched his brother from the corner of his scornful eyes as he ordered men about moving siege equipment with his own bare hands alongside worthless, nameless levies. But most of all, he could see the boy he loathed be a better leader than what he could ever hope to be. He exhaled, turning back to the narrow sea, watching the fog and mist flow into the bay. But that wasn't all. He could see silhouettes of what seemed like cogs and war galleys. He narrowed his eyes, examining the noir horizon, hoping his vision betrayed him. Sadly, what he saw was his unlucky reality, barely hidden and half visible in the dim light of the moon. Above, hundreds of warships bearing banners colored black by the night were floating into the scene. Drums. Joffrey's heart beat twice as slow, feeling the rumble rise from the very stone he stood upon. Always with the drums, crack claw point flashed into his worried mind. The drums and war cries of an army driven by a fervor unseen before. He could see their position growing along the coast as drums beat into the field of battle across the emblazoned coast. Cogs and warships bearing that accursed banner filled the sea. Joffrey could see them burning the defenders. When he first arrived, he could smell the smoking flesh from miles enough. Joffrey shook his mind from his fearful reverie. All around him, men and women shivered as the cold winds grew colder and the drums beat louder. Joffrey could see the banners already. The stag in a heart of fire. He could see their black armor forged in the fires of Dragonstone, imposing against the inferno. He could see his death. I can see my death. Steady. Naruto's booming voice echoed with command and presence. Be mindful of your thoughts and rein your fear. The battle has not yet begun, so be wary of what your mind tells you. Joffrey's eyes shot back at the massive crowd Of built orange, black, gold and crimson men and women, each one present for reasons of their own, had managed to find each other here for the turning point in the war. Destiny calls like no other, Naruto had said to him before the battle. Upon their faces each bore a story the king could have had no interest in knowing, but nevertheless he read each and every person he could see. Those of Fox Company were strange folk, almost none of them were as terrified as the rest of the defenders of King's Landing. What is their secret, uncle? Where's the royal fleet? Joffrey asked worriedly. As far as their squinted eyes could see, ships, cogs and war galleys filed into the bay. Easily over 100,000 waited upon that fleet, possibly even 200,000. Their drums beat mercilessly, shaking his body within his armor. Their drums. He looked to his brother, finding him unfazed by the amassed army in front of him. If anything, Joffrey could have sworn his brother was smiling in the face of probable incoming death. How can he smile in this situation? How can anyone be excited? Joffrey, I may hate you, but you're still my brother. Naruto rested a hand on the king's shoulder, giving him a silent nod. We still need a king, and Tommen is too young to be thrust into that title. I'll be keeping you alive tonight, but if I catch a scent of betrayal from your end of this arrangement, all I can say is that accidents happen in the field of battle. Am I clear? Crystal. Joffrey nodded back, but my question remains unanswered. Where's the royal fleet? Why is there only one ship? Because we only need one ship, Tyrion responded, not even taking a second to give his abhorrent nephew a glance. Are you daft? Joffrey shouted. Look out there are hundreds of ships, and you expect one of our own will fight them off? What kind of fool thinks those are reasonable odds? Joffrey, shut up, Naruto ordered darkly. Watch and enjoy. Not even I know what's happening. The ship seemed unremarkable, a cog of simple make. It was as standard as most seafaring cogs. Went strangely with the triangular bipod sails lower. The winds were of no consequence against the vessel, allowing it free sailing into the bay. Either stroke of luck or destiny. The prince wasn't going to pass this up. Naruto smirked, resting his palms against the stone. Merlin's lady, the beautiful direwolf, gifted to him as a battle companion by his equally beautiful lover, whined softly while the direwolf wasn't too fond of the beating drums. She was definitely not entirely fond of the shouting that had just commenced. Pushing that aside, the Baratheon scion had full faith in his companion, knowing full well that she would be just as reliable as Summer always was. Don't worry, girl. We'll be fine. Naruto scratched the direwolf's ear. We'll all be fine. The ship continued on its path. While Naruto only had suspicions of his uncle's nefarious plans, this only confirmed everything. His uncle was always a devious schemer. As the ship sailed about, he could see royal army retainers jump ship as they grew closer to the Stannis horde. Giant corks seemingly popped off the stern, releasing an all too familiar green substance, wildfire. Naruto looked down to his uncle with a raised brow. So that's why you took control of the Alchemists Guild, and I see you were snooping around beneath my nose and took the rest of it. Tyrion cheekily replied, I can only assume that your plans were similar to my own, and now Uncle. Naruto looked down at the stubby man. Our plans were quite similar, if I do say so myself, but in the end mine is definitely better. All right, now is the time. Tyrion pulled himself higher to see over the crunnels. Give the signal. Naruto took a torch from the Alchemist Guild master, who'd somehow showed himself. The prince gave the man a confused look, completely put off by the man's excited demeanor. Shaking his head, the Baratheon hurled the torch over the walls, watching Bronn, the ever-loyal sellsword, fire off a burning arrow. He leaned against the Merlin's anticipation burning throughout his body. In the distance he could have sworn he heard a man cry out, wildfire. This is it. Naruto breathed softly. This is it. Come on, Sir. Andar Jalabar whispered in the shuddering night. Now's the time. Get word to our forward positions to get ready. Yes, sir. The knight, devoid of his glimmering steel armor, took off with a few squires at his rear. Along the coast, the forests that surrounded the bay were dark and melodious with deep synchronization with the beating drums. Jalabar hadn't heard drums of that rhythm since his time in Essos, dealing with Rawal or fire priests and priestesses. Their holy order of knights were the hardest fight he'd had in decades, but all of this had the Summer Islander wondering. He could barely wrap his head around the thought a Westerosi was following Rawal. It was strange that 4 weeks prior he'd encountered the king along with his prince. Now everything that they'd been training and preparing for was at hand. Whatever you're thinking of, it is of no matter. Ser Dubers's voice came about. We're in position on both sides of the bay. Make certain the Baratheon king has not sent ground forces through our flanks. Jalabar responded, garnering a few hushed and silent affirmatives. Let's make this count. He marched through the underbrush of the Black Forest, blending with the night. His choice of attire suited their needs. He jumped back, running against the rocky hill behind him. From his position he had perfect view of the bay. At least 30 warships had already made it into the bay, breaking past the royal fleet's initial defense. The fight was magnificent, with massive showers of burning arrows and fiery boulders flying across the narrow sea. Jalabar narrowed his eyes, examining the position on the opposite end of the bay. Men and women were successfully placing the ballistae and mangonels up against the rocky tree-covered areas, making the inaccuracies of such equipment of no consequence. They weren't aiming to be accurate. Fox Company just needed something that could shoot mangonels while horribly inaccurate and a pain to aim correctly. They were quick and easy to construct and load. Jalabar looked below upon his own side of the bay, watching men and women pulling and winding their catapults and ballistae whilst loading pots and jars of wildfire, the secret weapon of this god's awful battle, out into the expanse of the narrow sea. The rest of Stannis' unholy armada awaited. Almost 200 ships sailed into view. Hundreds of thousands of men definitely waited to take the city and kill his prince. In the brisk cool night, illuminated beneath the large white moon, the banners of burning stags rushed against the winds blowing in their favor. Awestruck by the sheer number of ships, it was almost inconceivable for the Summer Islander that Stannis could mount an offensive this large and this quickly. But after the heroics of Fox Company and the near impossible things Naruto had already done for all of them in a year, that just showed him anything, even the enemy gaining a force beyond counting, was fair game. To be reasonable, the loyalties of Westerosi are laughable. Jalabar surmised, remove their king, they forget all ideas of freedom and free thought. Shameful. How are the catapults? Jalabar asked, eyes still planted on the growing fleet in front of him. He was responded with silence, not even the chafing of rope and creaking of the bronze mangonel gears filled his ears. Howard, his eyes widened, and instinct kicked, and he quickly dropped to the ground, crushing the leaves and twigs beneath his muscled chest. Strangely enough, the black armored dragonstone levies hadn't hurt him. Fox Company levies lay dead against the tree trunks and the very siege weapons they'd created. Jalabar slowly pulled his bow from around his torso, staring at the opposition. There were no more than 50 of them, and they were hell-bent on taking their own secret weapons and turning it against the city. Shit, Jalabar whispered, where are the knights when I need them? Suddenly an arrow whizzed past his ear, embedding into the chest of a seemingly dragonstone sergeant. His shout of pain echoed into the silent forest, riding with the song of beating drums. Jalabar shot to his feet, bow drawn, an arrow knocked and ready. A crossbow bolt shot past his ear, forcing him back behind his tree. To his rear, a Fox Company archer howled in pain, rolling down the slope of the rocky hill. The men of Dragonstone cried out orders, drowned in the echoes of war. Jalabar looked at the corpse as it rolled down the hill, sighing softly to himself. He knew that the warriors of Dragonstone hadn't calculated the skill of Summer Islanders. In the darkness of night, he released his first arrow, embedding the projectile through a levy's eye. Quickly knocking a second, he dodged a few crossbow bolts, narrowly escaping a painful death. Turning back to the levies, he released his arrow, its fletch whistling against the air. He watched as a second levy fell dead before touching the ground. Taking calculated shallow breaths, he knew better than to aim too long at his opponents. Jumping forward, whisking through the night like a specter, he drew 2 arrows at the same time, killing 2 more with absolute success. Men were running around confused and shouting orders. Ironically, their cries were muffled against the booming thunder of their own drums. Rocks and dirt shuddered beneath their never-ending song. Even Jalabar and his nerves of steel began to shake beneath the volume. With so many drums beating to the same rhythm, Jalabar could barely think. He rested against a new tree trunk, feeling bolts and their fletch whistle past his armored legs. They bounced off the stone ground, rocking and ringing into the night. Damn this, he turned, drawing another pair of arrows, firing off into the wild night. Distant thuds rang into his ears, catching him off guard. Jalabar took a moment, following the beat of Stannis' war drums. He couldn't tell if he killed them or not. If he followed the beat, armies using Associ military doctrines tended to be lockstep and or use drums to drill their forces into military machines. Jalabar knew this almost as well as Lady Tarina did, being a mercenary for a time. And Essos taught him many things of their tactics, which made him even more confused. A Westerosi acting almost entirely like an Associ, it was unheard of. Once more, like clockwork, he drew his bow, breaking the beat. 2 bodies fell. He looked through the forest, hoping reinforcements would come, but there were none that he could see. The shouts of the levies were suddenly beginning to sound awfully close. Jalabar rested his head against the tree, awaiting the eventual duel with blades. Suddenly, like a death wish come true, a broad axe swung for his head. He dodged the weapon by a mere inch, losing parts of his black feathered cap. He turned in the dirt and twigs, reaching over and pulled the levy to the ground, shoving a knife into his gut. Behind him, another levy raised his broad axe above his head, ready to strike, but like the mountain Jalabar, despite his muscles and size, he was quick like a ghostly wisp. The axe head dug into the levy's corpse, lodging into the bone. Without a second thought, the Summer Islander shot forward, tackling the man, landing punches and elbows against the black steel burgonet. The levy cried out, begging for mercy, but the beating drums and music of war drowned him out. Without thinking, the Summer Islander drew the levy's knife and slashed his chest, digging the short dagger through his thin flesh. He tore at the sternum, breaking the bone and ripping his skin apart. The man didn't stop screaming until Jalabar had made certain that his chest lay practically flayed. Smiling at his handiwork, he rushed down the side of the rocky hill, ready to meet his now smaller enemy. The first took notice of him swinging his sword like a hapless fool. He caught the man's arm, twisting it, digging the dagger into his chest, taking the air from his lacerated lungs. Tossing the man aside, he rushed ahead, kicking one behind his leg, slicing his throat clean, all the while hurling the knife into the side of another Levi. Jalabar heard a series of clicks in the pauses between beats. He dashed forward, grabbing the screaming Levi, and tore the knife from his side. Used as a human shield, the Levi took the bolts. Instead, fools have no discipline. Jalabar shivered as the bolts punctured the man he held hostage. His screams were no more, and his body fell limp. In between beats, he could hear the crossbows clicking and winding. It was his chance. Westerosi and their obsession with technological advancement left most armies with crossbows. While they dealt more damage and bolts flew faster, they took forever to load, leaving men like Jalabar with ample time to deal with them. He jumped through the forest, digging his foot into the first crossbow Levi, shooting him into the ground. The man groaned, leaving Jalabar certain he'd broken a few of the Levi's bones. He turned back, grabbing the next crossbowman, shoving his dagger into the man's gut, slashing outwards, spilling his intestines to the ground. The Levi's shrill scream caught the attention of the rest of the Dragonstone Levies. Wildfire, steer clear, steer clear. They cry came from the bay. Jalabar whipped around, eyes wide with surprise. No, it can't be, it's too early. Brown eyes followed the lone royal fleet ship sail in between the Dragonstone fleet, completely uninhibited, following its aft. A long trail of green substance wallowed into the saline waters. Jalabar suddenly froze, uncharacteristic of him, and suffered the consequences. A crossbow bolt shot through his shin, eliciting a deep roar as he collapsed. The last thing he saw was a small flaming arrow sailing through the starry night sky. My lady Arya Brienne sighed. I understand your anger towards the prince, but he is doing the both of you a favor. I'm not a lady, Arya grumbled. I am a fighter like you, Brienne. The both of us should be down there at the fronts with my brother and Naruto, swords in hand and a shield in the other. This is insulting, Arya. Sansa frowned. Stop it, you were nearly raped the first time we were in a battle. If you hadn't noticed, Sansa, Arya quickly responded, we weren't masters of our craft at the time. Now we are. A few rapers are nothing to me. Dragonstone footmen probably aren't any better than common rapers. If we're locked in here for fear of rape, we could and can handle anyone and anything that comes our way. Why can't you see that? Why can't anyone see that? Noble women and handmaidens looked at Arya with disdain and discomfort. Her boisterous attitude hadn't changed once since she was brought to King's Landing. While her marriage to Tommen was a main reason for her presence in King's Landing, she was also sent for the sole purpose of learning to be a noblewoman, and with that came the proper mannerisms. Like the wild wolf she was, she didn't care. Let the women and ladies of King's Landing say their piece. Arya never cared for their ladylike opinions. Tommen obviously didn't mind it and often enjoyed her banter with guards and weak-minded squires in the capital. Better yet, the queen herself, Cersei, was of the same opinion as her youngest son. Arya acted the way Cersei had always wanted to when she was a child. Speaking of the queen, she sipped her wine like she always did, but also softly caressed the large direwolf nestled at her feet. Nymeria hadn't lost any love for the woman since the year had passed, and Arya was relieved. Cersei even gave the Kingsguard dark looks when they asked if they could remove the burly creature. The queen had even threatened a few of the more distraught noblewomen with being thrown out to the rabid soldiers if they gave Nymeria looks that she or Lady Arya didn't approve of. Arya was content, at least. Even then, she'd complained every few minutes, wishing she were down at the parapet to hear Naruto's booming speech from her seat at the window. Her gray stark eyes watched the glimmering steel of swords, spearheads, axes, and blazing torches wave in the night. Naruto's wild blonde hair stuck out like a sore thumb. Even in the night's dark caress, she grabbed the windowsill just in time to feel the soft beating of drums echo through the ancient bricks and woodwork of the tower, overshadowing and drowning out the tolling bells of the city below. They've come, she whispered breathlessly. Look, Sansa, Brienne, look. It's Stannis Baratheon's army across the angled horizon, which gave them full view of the bay and a good section of the narrow sea. Arya shivered at the sheer number of warships gathered in the body of water from the parapets that she'd walked just an hour prior. The bay had seemed so large, now in her high tower and window, like a damsel in distress. The bay and the world itself had never seemed so small. The ships, while seeming like a tiny handful, she could feel a foreboding aura radiate throughout her stomach. Almost 30 ships crowded the bay, almost as if the first section of the fleet had come to a disheartening halt. The drums beat harder, and the beat had changed, even going so far to shake the chandelier that hung above the center of the tower room. Brienne rested against the sill, forearms crossed and eyes locked with the defenders of the mud gate as the beating war drums and tolling bells and war cries echoed and ravaged the air. Brienne turned to the young Stark with a brow raised, already seeing doubt and fear in the girl's posture. Are you absolutely certain that you want to be down there? Brienne asked. Look upon the field. There are no more than 5,000 defenders of this city, and with Stannis' forces there could easily be tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of men gathered upon that terrifying armada of warships, each and every one of them have experience fighting in the war. I've fought them before, and they are more than just rapers. They're veterans with more skill than you think." Arya was silent, eyes slowly trailing up to the tall war maiden, almost entranced with her words. I don't know, I figured as much." Brienne sighed. "War is not a game, and it is definitely nothing like the songs portray. When you're down there, the world seems smaller, and the hope for glory and riches, or anything for that matter, flies out the window. There's no glory, no riches, no fame, there's only death, and those who are waiting in line to be taken." "Not today," Arya whispered. Brienne gave the girl a confused look. "Excuse me, not today," Sansa repeated with a strong voice. "Our Braavosi dancing master taught us that." "What do we say to the god of death?" Arya asked. "Brienne, not today." Arya's eyes trailed slowly down towards the bay, eyes welling with hot salty tears. "I've been separated from my family, with only Sansa as my constant reminder that my family is not broken. I want to be down there to fight alongside my brother, to remind him that he is not alone. Robb has mother, and I can't even begin to imagine how Rickon feels left alone at Winterfell." Sansa was given a worried look from Cersei and Tommen, both having never seen Arya act in such a vulnerable way. Arya continued, talking to the war maiden of a stranger about how she'd felt many of these emotions. Not even Sansa had heard. The Ginger Stark gave the two royals the same look of similar confusion. Arya had never spilled her true feelings to anyone, and she was spilling her life story to Brienne, a war maiden that she barely knew. Arya continued to speak, gaining a few sympathetic looks from the noble women present. Cersei stared at the young Stark, placing her chalice down. "I've been rambling about rubbish, haven't I?" Arya rested her chin against the windowsill, eyes still planted on the incoming battle below. "Your Grace, how many ships are in the royal fleet?" "No more than 20 are stationed here in King's Landing." "Why?" Cersei gave the young Stark a confused look. "Then why is there only one ship heading towards Stannis' fleet?" Arya asked, pointing through the window. Cersei rose from her seat for the first time that night with an unreadable face plastered. The speed in which she did made Nymeria jump in surprise. The queen rushed worriedly over to the window, holding her skirts, making sure she didn't trip and fall if the queen left her wine. The noble women and Sansa knew that something was amiss. Curiosity seeped in, and Sansa rose to her own feet as well, but in a calmer and more reserved fashion, and briskly headed to the window just in time for the horrific light show. She could see it. The thick green translucent fluid muddied the rolling waves of the Blackwater. Staring at the foreign liquid, she was almost certain it was glowing. It spread across the bay, latching onto ships, coloring their keels an ominous ethereal green. The ship continued along undisturbed, making Sansa even more confused. It was almost as if the ship was unmanned, and the Dragonstone commanders were at a loss of what to do. The noble women, though, were entranced, intrigued even by the sudden commotion of the Starks and their queen regent. They too rose to their feet, slippers dragging against the ornate Valentine rugs and carpets and red stone floors like a miniature and dainty stampede. They clamored to see the battle from the remaining windows. Throughout the night, cold winds had blown. The strength of the winds reminded her of her dearly loved home of Winterfell. They were numerous, never once losing their strength since the break of dawn. Once dusk had fallen, the winds picked up, changing direction, blowing from the east. Sansa even had to change dresses to accommodate the change of weather, but for some reason, the winds had stopped. Not a gust, not a breath, and most certainly not a song. The air had fallen silent, as if Westeros herself had decided to hold her breath in weight of the battle as she fell victim to her anxious muse. A lone burning arrow arched into the sky, bringing with it a trail of almost invisible smoke. "What in the seven hells are they planning?" "Brace yourselves," Naruto cried, gripping the stone merlin. The arrow had met its mark. In an instant the wildfire ignited. Reactions after reaction occurred before the Baratheon, and now he knew why the alchemical abomination got its iconic name. Within moments, battlements across the old and beaten parapet shook and rumbled, and even the mud gate itself began to loosen its hinges as the wildfire spread. Light, unlike any seen before, seared into Naruto's eyes. Joffrey shot his hand up in an attempt to ease the pain, but there was no comfort to be found. Bran shot his head down, hiding behind the merlin, but from the light came silence all around him. The battlefield had fallen. Deaf bells no longer tolled, and the abhorrent drums had stopped beating their incessant tune. Joffrey had stopped shouting, and Tyrion stopped with snarky remarks. The rumble of stretching ropes and creaking gears had fallen silent in the wake of the sudden light. Naruto was blind and deaf to the world around him. With light such as this, no man was strong enough to withstand. He'd fallen victim, and from the light came the fire. Explosions roared through the silence like a lion, reminding his pride. It shredded through his eardrums with a high-pitched squeal, leaving a screeching ring in its wake. The wildfire was immediately replaced with a green inferno as it rose and spread eating away at Stannis' fleet. Fires rushed out in all directions, eating away at the fleet and forests surrounding the bay. He held onto the Merlin with all the strength he could muster, fearful of the growing tidal wave of fire. The winds had returned thrice as strong and devoid of winter's cold, tearing the helmets from some of the levies present, and even shredding a few of the banners from their stakes. Wind as strong as this had killed the fires of their torches, leaving the only light that was the ominous yet ethereal emerald that the raging wildfire had birthed. Boiling water and burning planks from Stannis' fleet rained upon the defenders of King's Landing, but most were undeterred. In the midst of it all, Naruto stood tall, doing his best to remain the image of victory. Bran struggled to keep his wits about him, shivering beneath the sudden contrasts of temperature at his sides. Maya and Gendry stood with bows in their hands, ready for whatever their enemies brought forth upon them, but that didn't mean they weren't afraid. Gendry shivered in his armor, and Maya seemed to be shedding soft tears. Even with Fox Company and Naruto alive and well, nothing in this situation made him feel any better. From their safe distance on the parapet, they could still hear the screams and howls of burning men out in the once beautiful bay, as if they were there themselves, burning alongside them. Even the ever-loyal and strong-willed direwolf Summer was struggling beneath the apocalyptic terror. The Prince gripped the Merlin, feeling the stone crush and powder beneath his chakra-enhanced grip. He can hear them screaming, begging even for the release of death. They were running back and forth like rolling balls of fire. Ships sunk into the bay with fires still raging, reminding Naruto that this was the plan from the start. Like he'd come to assume, men threw water upon each other, but wildfire is not so easily put out. Unlike any feeling before, he could feel regret burning, churning even within his stomach. Bringing super weapons such as these to the battlefield would do a good job at breaking the enemy's morale as well as his own. This wasn't a war, this was a massacre. He looked out onto the coast, hoping that the wildfire hadn't burned their positions, and most of all, he'd hoped his uncle's plans didn't get his friends killed. As much as he wanted to send a forward scout party to search for his friends, he knew none of that mattered right now. What did matter was that he needed to press the attack. Stannis didn't know about his own wildfire emplacements, and Naruto was certain Stannis thinks this is all we have to use to defend the city, giving Bran a look of uncertainty. He could barely meet the Stark's terrified eyes. The squire's hands shook softly, and much to the prince's surprise, he already had an arrow knocked and ready. Naruto, whenever you're ready to give the signal, Bran said breathlessly. Now that the heat had receded, the cold had returned, wrapping his damp body in its piercing embrace. Across the parapet, men of Fox Company were shivering, shell-shocked by what they'd had the luck of witnessing. The stones and boulders shook and rumbled in the cranes and catapult bowls. Naruto knew wildfire was powerful, but he never once deemed it necessary to think of the beauty and terror it could cause his own troops. A folly he'd noticed too late. He looked back to find Lannister men and Joffrey's own men just as fearful in the rear. Sandor Clegane and his stumped hand and eternal shield was shaking, visibly horrified of the emerald flames. But once the fire disappeared and the green light had subsided, Naruto realized that the drums hadn't stopped. The drums continued beating, sending fear into the hearts of the weaker men. He heard their words of self-doubt and anxious excuses they told themselves. He could hear their confusion and anger. He knew how they felt, and it angered him far more than any of them could imagine. Naruto only knew that he felt the same, and that in itself angered him even more. The fool Stannis was always a bull when it came to getting things he wanted, even at the cost of thousands of his own men. In the process, the prince had heard enough stories of how Stannis was in his younger days, spewing justice and self-righteousness in all forms, but to sacrifice countless numbers of his own men for the sake of springing the trap was a whole new level for the prince. The cruelty the man held within made him sick to his stomach. To think that he was even thinking or even fancied the thought of alliance with a man such as that came to him served on a plate of irony as it was. Naruto could see his uncle climbing down the cargo ropes with men following after him, fearless and burning with fervor like a plague of darkness. Men clad in war armor climbed after him, jumping into longboats. Spears, swords, axes, and banners glimmered in the fiery night, coloring the once glimmering emerald night with a palette of empty darkness. Give the signal. Naruto frowned, gritting his teeth at the foolishness of his uncle. Fucking give the signal. Drown the Blackwater in wildfire. Uncaring with his tone, Naruto gripped the Merlin, turning the corners of the Merlin into powder, catching his two relatives off guard. Despite seeing red, he managed to catch the sound of Tyrion and Joffrey both jumping at his sudden order. They both grabbed Naruto, bombarding him with questions, completely forgetting the battle at hand. The prince couldn't care for their fear and simply paid neither of them the attention they needed. Fox Company levies started chanting and cheering at their commander's roar. He saw nothing but red now. Naruto wanted nothing more than green. Bran nodded to his blonde friend, still uncertain with the order, knocking a new burning arrow and raising it to the sky. Bran gave Naruto a quick look, asking for reassurance, receiving a confident nod in response. Drawing the bowstring back as far as he could, Maya quickly stabbed a Sponge damp with wildfire, the two lovers nodded at one another, leaving Bran to release the inferno. Here goes nothing. Like a deep resounding baritone song, the explosion subsided, allowing Jalabhar to finally regain his bearings. Finding himself behind a boulder, half blind and half numb above him, Ser Andar was patching up his wounded leg, wrapping it with bandages at varying grips and tightness. The Summer Islander groaned against the sudden pain, wincing when the Hedge Knight finished. When his vision finally cleared and sharpened, what he saw would be ingrained in his mind for ages to come. The bay was covered in a beautiful yet ominous green hue. Rising into the sky, shrouding the once clear and starry night, was a mushroom cloud of the same menacing emerald. Men screamed, running back and forth across the burning deck. Ships had been shredded, torn asunder into the bay as the shockwave continued spreading. Cogs were sinking into the shimmering waters, but the fires were not put out. Heat rose like a soprano's pitch. The keys of the battle song changed as the racing fire shot outward in all directions. The heat was nothing new to the Summer Islander, but either way the rampaging fires were not welcome. Once it passed, Jalabhar slowly rose, finding that Fox Company had thankfully managed to retake the coast. In the chaos of the wildfire, more men had filled the position and executed the remainder of the Dragonstone coastal assault, but Jalabhar felt none more terrified. The trees around them had been burned to a crackling black crisp, leaving their secret position bare for all to see. That signal, whatever it was, had better come quickly. He was absolutely certain that their position had been compromised, and now that the first wildfire attack had failed to defeat the majority of Stannis' fleet, he could only assume that the imp had concocted the plan without consulting Naruto first. He frowned, knowing that their plans will be futile if communication is not made. It was only a matter of time until the remainder of the invasion sweeps the coasts for their placements. Any word from the city? Jalabhar asked the Hedge Knight. When will we strike at Stannis? No word as of yet. Ser Andar frowned. I'm just as anxious as you, my friend. Oh no, men. Defensive positions. Jalabhar whipped back around, pain radiating from his bandaged chin, almost as if common sense had slapped him across the face. Jalabhar sighed, running his hand over her face. Stannis' commanders of the rear sent a preemptive coastal assault. The Dragonstone levies rushing through the coast in force. This time they were more than just simple footmen and levies. These were men at arms, shields and castle-forged steel. These men were professional soldiers, unlike the 50 men from before. Without the signal, this meager 30-member Fox Company defense would fail against this hornet's nest of Dragonstone that they'd managed to stir. With the lack of most of their trees and leaves, they were left out in the open, illuminated by the glowing aftermath in the bay. Jalabhar had no more places to hide, sans the crates and boulders for their mangonels. He was handed his bow and a new quiver. He gave Ser Andar a confused look, but was pointed at a sizzling quiver of black feathers with arrows broken, snapped and thrown askew. He frowned, running a hand across his face, knowing full well that it took ages for him to harvest those feathers back home in the Red Flower Vale. As the men of Dragonstone advanced upon them, Fox Company drew their swords, braced spears and raised their shields for the incoming melee. Dragonstone roared and chanted like savages as they came upon them. Jalabhar could see it. Sweat cascaded down their brows and upon their dew-covered cheeks. This was not of the wildfires doing. The men were terrified. Many of these Fox Company members present had just recently joined, many of which the poor Summer Islander didn't even have the honor of knowing their names. But with the battle at hand and lives at stake, second thoughts and regrets couldn't linger. Jalabhar couldn't wait any longer behind the formation of infantry. He gave the remaining archers available a quick look in order they let loose their arrows, puncturing and killing a few of their targets, but the damage wasn't enough. Once more Jalabhar gave quick orders, hoping that the commands were received. Despite the chaos of the aftermath within the bay, his brown eyes scanned the area, constantly trailing to the floating inferno, terror taking hold. From what he witnessed, there were many dead, and so many more were still burning in that green unnatural flame. Their screams contrasted against the clash of swords and shields. The decks of the wrecked cogs and ravaged war galleys were spitting smoke, slowly eaten alive by the calming monstrosity. My lord, the Dragonstone levies have tower shields. Our arrows can't affect them. A shriek came from a female levy, bringing him back to the battle at hand. She, along with 15 other Fox Company levies, were running low on arrows, and sadly they weren't the best with swords and spears. Some of the weaker men and women cried out, breaking formation, and some even made a half-manic break towards the city walls as the growing horde of Dragonstone washed upon them. Jalabhar knew how they felt, but words could not leave his lips. Words in a situation like this had as much effect as paper. To stop a tidal wave. Sighing in defeat, the Summer Islander did what he did best and knocked an arrow, drawing the arrow fletch back, tickling his cheek. No man or woman will take a step back until we have lit the bay ablaze. Jalabhar roared, Fox Company, show these Dragonstone cunts how we fight. Yes sir. In the dimming green hue of wildfire, Jalabhar made out the dark burgonet and yellow iron of kettle helmets used by men at arms of Renly Baratheon's host. There were orange gambeson and bronze burgonet bearing stag emblem just at the brow, either color, either helm. They were fighting for the same king. A pretender. Their helmets bothered him, filling him with an anger he thought he'd left at Tumbleton. Nevertheless, with eyes like eagles, he released his arrow, sending it flying through the night like music to his ears. The arrow punctured a man at arm's Bergonet with a soft ring barely processed in the heat of battle. Each kill seemed to have no effect on the sinister horde of Dragonstone. The Summer Islander quickly strapped his bow to his back, drawing his dark steel scimitar. They were coming close, and the fleet was pushing onward with the green flames of wildfire coming to that of simple orange. The mental effects would run out soon. He looked back, taking in the sight of the weak red walls along the King's Landing. The banners of Fox Company had finally come to a steady beat, telling him the effects of the wildfire had all but disappeared, replaced with the breath of nature. He needed that signal. Jalabar Ser Andar gave the man a grave look. We have to release the wildfire soon. I'm certain Naruto thinks we're dead. Just wait, I'm more than certain he knows we're still here. Jalabar glared. Now men, hold the shield wall. No Dragonstone levies are getting to our siege weapons. Fox Company held steady, pushing against the savagery of Stannis' men. They swung and bashed against the tower shields to no avail, and much to Jalabar's relief, Dragonstone couldn't make ground across the field from the rocky hill to the singed and burning Amber Coast. Fox Company held them off with an arsenal of their own tower shields. He turned back, raising his scimitar, catching the attention of the archers and crossbowmen present. While the horde fought against Fox Company's stalwart defenders, he ran upon the rock slopes to meet the archers on the hill nearby. Archers, he roared, garnering a few shouts and affirmatives. Knock arrow shafts knocked upon bow grips, and arrow shelves. Archers draw. Jalabar gave the field a look, finding pockets and weaknesses in the Dragonstone defense. He blanched at how their force was practically dedicated to nothing but offense. So this would be a bloodbath. All right, men. Jalabar laughed loose, boom, as the arrows rushed past him, smashing against Dragonstone helms and cuirasses. Jalabar turned back, watching the beautiful cloud of green fire exploding above the ruined forward fleet. That's the signal. A voice came from below. That's the signal. As the shout echoed through the skirmish, some Dragonstone sergeants and levies looked up, and each and every one of them keeping watch of the siege weapons. Almost like fire had been born from within, they rushed against the shield wall, kicking and even jumping upon them in a last-ditch effort to break through. Fox Company tried to hold still, but there were just too many slash, cut, and lunge. Men and women began to fall, creating large holes in their defense. Ser Andar, hold the line. Jalabar jumped below, leaving his archers under command of another. He rolled against the dirt, dodging Dragonstone halberds and spears shooting to his feet. He jumped over a spear just in the nick of time. With expert grace, he slashed outwards, taking the face and life from the Dragonstone levy who dared face him. Spinning like the warriors of his home, he landed on his feet, rushing forward towards the first of the siege weapons. Ser Andar, Jalabar roared, now's the time. Sansa shut her eyes, holding her forearm against her face. The light was unlike any she'd seen before. The sheer intensity of it was unbelievable. Next to her, some of the noble women cringed and even screamed at the sudden intrusion, but it was the explosion that nearly sent the fearful women careening to chaos. The explosion resounded like thunder into the seemingly empty night, shaking the chandeliers upon the ceiling and knocking torches from their sconces. Dust fell from the ceiling as cracks formed, tumbling the ancient keep. Arya had never felt such a thing before. Feeling winds rushed towards the tower, blowing the drapes and veils of their dresses. What irked the Stark pair? The winds were hot. As the light died down, Sansa's jaw hung loose, wordlessly entranced and bewitched by a sight nothing short of horrific. A cloud akin to mushrooms rose high into the night, bathing the city in glowing bay in an ethereal green. Ships were torn board by board, splinter by splinter, shredded until nothing was left. Their hardwood frames, banners had torn from their stakes, and men were on fire across the field. The forests surrounding the bay were ablaze as green flames spread. While the woman wasn't down there, she could only imagine the fear and terror the defenders of King's Landing had sown into Stannis' ranks. That was amazing. Arya looked to her, gray eyes glowed like silver pieces. Lady Brienne, did you see that? Brienne of Tarth was too shaken to respond to the excited Stark. Sansa narrowed her eyes to the land closing off the bay, having noticed something strange out of the corner of her eyes. While the fires had stopped spreading and stopped eating away at all living things down there, action brewed like barrels of tea in the forests, and with all the flashes of light she could see, while the flames of wildfire had halted, the battle spread quickly, eerily akin to that abhorrent inferno. There were many small flashes of moonlight reflecting of swinging blades and axe heads, while the defenders of the walls were repositioning, pulling ropes and preparing to follow up with another strike. The Positans along the coasts were breaking with each passing second. Something's wrong down there. Sansa frowned, resting against the windowsill. What do you mean? Arya asked, rising from her seat. Down over to the right side of the bay. Sansa pointed through the window. After the wildfire exploded, the trees were burned away. There are catapults and ballistae waiting in between trees and boulders. Oh, Arya looked back to the battle, watching flaming arrows fly across the bay, and Through the forests, that must be Naruto's secret weapon and strategy. How do you know of that? Sansa asked worriedly. Arya smirked. The newer members of Fox Company don't know to keep their mouths shut. They spoke of secret positions and weapons ready for Stannis' assault. Whatever it is, I wouldn't. Sansa paused. Suddenly an arrow as bright as the moon itself shot straight into the sky, glowing with an ominous green, a micro-inferno, surrounding the projectile like an aura, pulsating like a heartbeat. Like a few minutes prior, the winds had stopped blowing, leaving the world. A few seconds of reprise. Stressful sour seconds passed, and like the ships below, the arrow violently exploded mid-air with a sound similar to the deep baritone of a popping war drum. An entirely new signal. What in the seven hells is happening here? Sansa, Arya cried, gray eyes as wide as plates. Look, the coast, it's lighting up on both coasts of the bay. Small flames of green had suddenly grown. One by one a new flame was born, adding to the terrifying line of imminent and fiery death. While Stannis' fleet flowed into the bay, burning corpses and blazing hulls were pushed aside, split by the imposing and well-constructed bows and hardwood frames. Men dressed in black armor climbed down cargo ropes along the starboard and port side into longboats. There were almost 40 longboats already rowing across the fiery bay, and there were many more loading up, preparing to attack the beach. Like the parasite, Fear held the Stark with a dark and terrifying caress, with ice blue eyes piercing through the dimly lit tower heights. Darting left and right, Sansa was slowly gaining an understanding of what was happening. Ships sailed into the bay, crowding it like never before. She couldn't believe the hapless actions of Stannis' fleet commanders. Sansa stared in disbelief. The commanders had no idea what was coming to them, and so it truly begins. The wildfire fell from the sky like a curse from the gods themselves. Rage and hate came with each burning pot as it landed in the bay and upon the new ships entering. Each explosion sent men flying in soaring fits of fire like the stories of Aegon's conquest. The wildfire had done its job. Hundreds were thrown into the bay, gripping to the life they could feel melt away. Ships exploded from within, ripping their hulls outward. Unlike Tyrion's initial attack, after each pot was shot, another would fly towards a different direction, filling the waters and catching men and ships ablaze within. His chest beating like the war drums themselves, Naruto could feel the regret growing with each pot thrown into the sky. Each crash and explosion was another reminder of his folly in bringing death of this scale, and the swarm of vultures that always come with him. Their screams were different this time. They were filled with a fear deeper than any before he could hear. The hopelessness in their commands and shouts and battle cries. Their morale was waning and their trust in their king was running thin. It had to be done, Naruto thought to himself. It has to be done. Pots soared like eagles rushing through the starry night. Arches of translucent green were thick and festered in the air, filling the nostrils with the distinct smell of burning flesh. Thankfully, Naruto knew that the amount of wildfire they had managed to get a hold of before Tyrion raided and flooded that cog, they were going to run out soon. Now all I have to do is wait and make sure Jalabhar can follow through with the plan, Naruto thought to himself. After the first blast of wildfire, the trees and the brush were washed away in a cloud of fiery green. Now all that remains of the right flank are the bare siege weapon placements. Jalabhar had better make it back alive. Archers, Naruto howled into the singing night. Knock upon the beach. Stannis had jumped from his ship, ducking as the pots continued to rain upon his forces. The forces of Dragonstone rushed forward, bringing out ladders and tower shields among their ranks. Naruto smirked. It seems they weren't wasting any time. Stannis knew that he wouldn't dare train his siege weapons upon the city to stop his assault. Draw. Naruto drew his bastard sword for the first time that night, its silvery pristine blade flashing green and white as the pots drowned the Blackwater. Loose arrow fletch sung as they whistled past his ears as he'd come to enjoy. The volley took down 80 of Stannis' men behind him. Catapults and ballistae armed their payload. Men rushed to the gatehouse, barring the weak and molded wood of the mud gate, terrified of the booming shouts coming from out onto the beach. Sandor Clegane, Naruto called. You're in command of the response. Sally out to meet them with 40 men. Whatever you say, the hound barked, revealing a cocky bravado. Come on, you sapless cunts, pushing along Lannister men at arms and calling upon a posse of Fox Company men at arms. The hound opened the gate and expertly drew his longsword and proudly emblazoned his stumped hand. If any of you shits die with a clean sword, I'll rape you fucking corpse. Now come on, Naruto called forth for another volley as the hound clashed with the first of Stannis' troops that managed to make landfall. Swords clashed as sparks and blood sprang into the air. Naruto released a breath of relief as the battle between giants came to a crashing climax. The hound struck down what seemed to be a Dragonstone lieutenant in a rage-induced fit. His heart broke at the sight of half having fallen to the beach with their guts, limbs and heads removed from their bodies. Their deaths were numerous, and the forces of Stannis Baratheon continued to wade through the Emerald Inferno. Once more men, Naruto shouted. Knock. Arrow shafts knocked against the bow grips and arrow shelves. Draw. Bowstrings struggled and tightened loose in a resounding chorus. A volley wall of arrows sprang forward over the heads of the sally force and into the bay itself, picking off the men still on longboats, and those who decided to swim to shore. Men were dying across the fields, leaving heaps and piles of dismembered or scorched corpses everywhere. Coming as a surprise to him, the ladders were brought out, landing right in front of the prince with a maneuver as swift as the winds themselves. The first dragonstone levy to dare show his face before the prince was slashed free of his intestines. His body fell, clinging to the ladder, holding it place with a glare. The prince pushed the man forward, and the like he'd hoped, the ladder came with him, forcing the Baratheon host to start back at step 1. Knock. The Baratheon forces flipped a longboat, revealing it to be a protective cover for a battering ram appropriately emblazoned with the head of a full-grown stag. It took almost 10 men to lift the monstrosity. They dragged it through the sand and countless rocks and pebbles. "Light your arrows," Naruto called. Gripping his sword, suddenly the gate swung open, nearly making the Baratheon scion's blood boil below. From the 41 men he sent out to sally Stannis' men, only 7 returned. The Hound looked traumatized, and the remaining men seemed to have lost their fire and will to continue fighting. "Hold," Naruto called across the parapet. Archers with confused looks upon their faces lowered their bows and arrows. "What are you doing?" Clegane Tyrion shouted. "You are Kingsguard, now go back out there and fight for your city. Your king's city." The Hound paid the dwarf no attention. "Fuck the Kingsguard, fuck the city, and fuck the king. Now someone bring me some fucking wine." Naruto scowled at the Clegane's remark, eerily reminding him of when the Hound had 2 hands, taking matters into his own hands. Ignoring the fearful ramblings about fire and death, the prince gave command to the Stark squire beside him. Before jumping from the parapet, Tyrion reached out to stop his nephew, but to his and everyone's surprise, the prince landed peacefully. "If you don't want to fight out there and be surrounded by fire and people you know can't keep up with you in a fight, then go to the tower where the noble women are held and defend them with your fucking life," Naruto shouted. "If you don't, I'll kill you right now." To end your incessant rambling, Sandor bowed before the prince and took off towards the Red Keep without another word in all directions. Men had parted from the prince, staring at him with terror. They were more terrified of him than they were of the wildfire hailstorm happening just outside of the protection of the city's walls. He looked upon them, meeting the eyes of each and every man and woman present. "I know you're scared," Naruto said with an easy tone. "Believe it or not, I am too, but now is not the time for fear. Now is the time to prove to our city, our families, and to ourselves that we will prevail no matter the opposition. Listen to what's happening out there with the storm of wildfire and the hail of fiery death. Stannis' men still haven't faltered. Those are brave men banging at our gates. Let's go kill them." "Yes, sir." Like a dream come true to Stannis Baratheon, the gate had suddenly opened. Beneath the shroud of cover he held the battering ram steady, but from within the city came a sight he didn't think he'd see. A brave attempt, and almost suicidal, but brave nonetheless. Naruto jumped forward, swinging his blade so hard and so fast the chains holding the head of the battering ram had split, shattering like glass. The 2 men at the fore were cut down just as quickly and just as smoothly. The prince ducked beneath a broad axe and quickly responded with a fatal lunge, tearing through the orange gambeson of the levee before him. Behind the small force of Fox Company knights the gate had shut, and the sounds of nails and barricades were heard banging against the heavy yet molded mud gate. To the Baratheon king's sides the ladders were finally gaining a foothold. To his rear more men were rushing at the walls and making land. The wildfire pots have finally come to a halt. Either the fools have run out or my men have apprehended them. No matter the reality, I'm just glad that the wildfire had stopped. He jumped back, dodging the greatsword of a heavy armored knight of Fox Company. With a quick motion the Baratheon drew Lightbringer, clashing the glowing blade against that of the greatsword. Sparks ignited, showering upon the field of stone and sand. The knight was slow but hit hard with quick repercussions. The king swung his fist, disorienting the knight from within his steel bucket of a helm. As swift as the Associ across the narrow sea he brought Lightbringer around, slashing the knight's abdomen out from his armor. Blood cascaded from the garish wound, adding yet another corpse to the bloodbath. As men rushed to the ladders, yet another barrage of arrows rushed to greet the city's invaders. Men fell like wheat to the scythe, garnering a few well-deserved groans and sighs of defeat, but he had a fight at hand thanks to the last-minute strategy from his most trusted advisor Sir Davos Seaworth. He decided to ride with the battering ram. Now he was meeting face to face with the threat to his throne. "Naruto Baratheon, I see you've recovered," Stannis chided. "See to me now, Naruto, over my dead body." Naruto roared. Neither knew who swung first, but sparks danced around the dueling pair. Naruto bent back, dodging Lightbringer by just mere inches. With the advantage, the prince lunged forward with his bastard sword, nearly piercing the Baratheon king's armor. Sadly, the plates were strategic and deflected most lunges and swings, but like all armor there were weak points in every make. Using underhand tactics like Sasuke had taught him, Naruto dropped to the ground below with a powerful leg swipe. Like a felled tree, the balance and battlefield presence that Stannis held was lost. In an instant the king fell upon his back, but didn't dare lose grip on Lightbringer. He struggled to get up, finding the weight of his armor was beginning to finally weigh him down. I think you should retire, old man, Naruto laughed, raising his sword above his head. The old Baratheon rolled away, narrowly dodging his nephew's strikes and swings. Either luck or the will of his foreign god kept Stannis alive. He had somehow found the strength and agility, jumping up to his feet with his sword poised and ready to strike. A welcome challenge, of course, but it still irked the Baratheon prince. They paced each other, each one weighing their options and watching the other's footwork like a game of cat and mouse. The two waited for the first one to break the mold. Sapphire met with Sapphire in a visual showdown as chaos was law around them. The two were locked in their own world, examining their strengths and weaknesses. Swords still poised. A series of screams and battle cries broke their concentration. Naruto jumped, kicking a Dragonstone Levy's jaw, denting his black Bergonet. With quick reflexes he grabbed the second and shoved his bastard sword into the man's chest, earning a guttural splutter of blood and half-intelligible words. Sliding the corpse from his slicked blade, he clashed his sword with another. Sparks creaked and slid upon the length. Naruto pulled away, creating a small pocket of distance and enough room to work with. Thinking back to his duel with Rob a year ago, he feigned to the right, forcing the slower Levy to protect his left, leaving his right side completely unprotected and free. With speed and skill on his side, the prince tilted his blade ever so slightly, taking the right kneecap from the man. He collapsed, dropping his guard with a moment's worth of decision making. The prince shoved his sword down the exposed neck of the Levy. Blood cascaded like a waterfall, drenching Naruto's boots and breeches. Kicking the corpse from his sword, he turned his attention back to his uncle like a specter. His uncle was already upon him with his sword drawn and ready. Oh, not even going to wait for me to get prepared. Without enough time to react, he dropped his bastard sword and drew out a dagger with a foot-long blade. He dodged and weaved in and out of Stannis' attacks and lunges. While Rob was an expert with lunging, Stannis was an all-rounder, not surprising given the years of combat and warfare he has under his belt. Naruto ducked and jumped forward, rolling through the sand and stones. With little options and a growing Dragonstone presence on the beach, he turned on his heels, hurling his dagger at his uncle. How the man managed to block it was beyond the prince. Protect the king. Naruto's eyes went wide when he'd realized the situation. He'd forced himself into fire, blocked his escape in any direction except for the way he'd come around him. There were 5 levies, each with swords and axes. Stannis laughed and turned his attention to the walls and ladders ready to scale the city. I don't think so, Naruto roared. The first levy rushed at him, fire in his eyes and fire upon his sword. He was burly and seemed like he'd eaten too much kidney pie before coming to war. Naruto bashed the man's chest with his gauntlet-protected fist, forcing the man's dinner from his gullet. In the moment of his weakness, Naruto grabbed the flaming sword and skewered the fat man where he stood retching upon the battlefield. Recuperating, he spun, clashing with a dark steel axe head, garnering a few beautiful sparks in the process. He quickly followed through, ducking beneath a sword and axe combination, jumping back, nearly running into the flames themselves. Naruto had created a bubble of space much larger than the one he had between himself and Stannis. With Porker dead, he had a lot more space to maneuver now. All that remained was who wanted to die first. I choose you. With chakra radiating off of his legs, he smashed his armored knee into the unprotected chin of a levy. Naruto could have sworn he heard the man's neck snap before his feet even touched the ground. He swung his sword with such strength and speed the next levy's sword split and his head fell loose, giving his final opponent some time to reposition. Naruto flashed him a deathly smile. I'm Naruto Baratheon. The levy gave the prince a horrified look. I'm sorry to say this, but you're a dead man. With speed like before, he shoved his sword into the man's chest, denting and even shattering the blade within the man's torso. His scream reeked of onions and meat. Naruto watched as his eyes rolled to the back of his head with a bloody, curdling muffle. Lady, Naruto cried, come on girl, let's cause some damage. It's finally time, Sansa thought to herself. Eyes slowly rolled to the back of her head like every other time before. It was a psychedelic experience. Her soul rushed from her body, zooming through the air, seeing arrows and boulders flying up close. She whisked down to the parapet, looking at her brother shoot arrows like he was born to it. Across the wall, cranes were lifted and lowered, and boulders were loaded and launched. Maya and Gendry, the bastard siblings of her lover, were doing their best to keep up. In the courtyard behind the mud gate was filled with anxious men and women listening to Lord Tyrion's commands and orders. She shook her head and sped up to the ever-excited wolf lady. Once she'd possessed the animal, the entire world before had changed, smaller but in greater detail. She jumped at Naruto's call for help. Excitement ran through her fur and throughout her stomach at the command and request. Lady jumped from the 20-foot-tall parapet, landing on a small unit of Dragonstone levies, crushing them in her weight while she was one of the smaller dire wolves of the litter. Lady was still quite large with jaws just as powerful as Summer's. Only difference was that Lady hadn't had actual combat experience. With confidence booming from her paws, Lady pounced upon the first levy she saw, tearing at the man's neck, shredding his skin apart. Naruto jumped next to Sansa, filling her with pride and an excitement she hadn't felt in hours, watching him fight for the first time without fear and terror holding her body. He moved like a dancer, swift, quick, and agile, but most of all he was precise. Sansa dashed forward, shoving her direwolf head into the breastplate of a dragonstone knight, denting the steel and sending him flying a few feet. Landing upon her paws, she smiled, revealing hanging meat and blood-drenched teeth. She could smell the knight's fear festering within his heavy armor. Naruto, though, suddenly appeared, spinning and swinging his sword. Without blinking, Sansa witnessed the man she loved dismember a knight twice his size. With ease he kicked the gushing knight away from his path and tackled yet another levy, bashing the steel pommel of his sword against the boy's face. Sansa popped her direwolf neck and charged ahead, clearing Naruto's rear and flanks of any enemies that may have slipped past his warpath. "Come here, bitch," a vengeful voice echoed. "I'm gonna cut you up and cook you in a stew." A fat man wearing a dark gambeson and only a black leather coif for protection lunged at her with a broad axe. She dodged, luckily in time, but lost a few hairs of fur in the process. She sunk her teeth into his hand, but the burly man shoved his left fist into her snout, causing Sansa's body to wince back. In the tower, Lady whined softly but growled menacingly at the fat man. Sansa once more popped her direwolf neck and rushed beneath the man's legs, catching him off guard. While Naruto concentrated on defeating a pair of men-at-arms, Sansa was left to deal with her biggest threat and first real test of her warging ability. The man raised his hands above his head, both clasping to the axe shaft. In a moment of truth, Sansa jumped forward, sinking her teeth into his neck, eliciting a howl of pain from the burly man. But instead of stopping and dropping dead, he grabbed Lady by the underbelly and shoved his fist into her chest, pushing the direwolf away. Sansa couldn't believe the pain she felt. While the armor protected against most slashes, stabs, and arrows, she was certain it didn't protect against punches. Sharp pains exploded from within her chest. It had its own pulse. "Better yet, dog," the man laughed. "I'm gonna roast ya." Sansa's eyes went wide at the implications, taking a quick recap of her scenery. Fires raged behind her all along the coast and within the waters themselves. She was dangerously close to some fire already, and if she wasn't careful the man might actually succeed in his endeavor. He was already scratching at the bite marks she'd left on him. With the flashes of flickering red, she smirked at the blood already beginning to flow down the man's chest. He charged at her, steps sickeningly slow due to his weight. He kicked sand out of his way and dragged rocks and chipped debris along with him. Sansa stood on her haunches, ready to pounce. Once more he came into range once more, and she once again had him in her maw. He struggled harder this time, finding her will a lot more powerful than before. She could feel his throat rip beneath the power and strength in her jaw, barking and chewing at the man. Sansa finally brought him to the dirt below and feasted upon his unprotected flesh. Blood spewed forth like a geyser. He struggled and screamed, punching at her sides, beating upon the metal and leather plates of armor. Her white fur was drenched red and made slick within seconds of her kill. It didn't take long, but he stopped fighting, and one by one his arms fell to his sides and his screaming stopped. Sansa sighed, trailing her direwolf eyes up to see Naruto kneeing a levy in the gut behind him, another charged with a spear. Sansa was about to react, but the Baratheon grabbed the spear and twisted the shaft out from the levy's own hands, chafing his palms with splinters and heat, bashing the staff against the levy and shoving the spearhead into the one. He need. Naruto spun around, kicking the final into the dirt and shoving his sword into the man's chest. "Lady, come on, girl," Naruto called proudly. "We have a battle to fight." Naruto elbowed the levy, sending him staggering, but out of nowhere Lady came, slamming her paws upon the man and chewing his throat out from his neck. He collapsed in a fountain of blood, followed with a chorus of pain-ridden shrieks, turning his attention back to the battle at hand. A man-at-arms swung a mace at him while any normal man would have turned tail and ran. Naruto was no mere man. The man-at-arms was too slow, and with all that extra armor on his body and arms it was surely weighing him down. It was almost laughable. He dodged the mace, letting the man over swing and lose his balance. Naruto stifled his laugh, watching the armored man topple over into the sand. To save him further embarrassment, the prince stabbed his blade through the man's sides, digging the sword into the dirt below. He laughed proudly, tearing the blade from the corpse, calling upon his faithful companion Lady. The direwolf barked in affirmation and charged ahead of him, but before he could press the offensive, screams were coming from the far left flank of Stannis' invasion. The shouts and cries of pain and death were increasing in number and filled Naruto with confusion, but much to his pleasant surprise his uncle Tyrion and his brother the King Joffrey himself had joined the fight. Naruto did his best to burst into laughter and thankfully didn't Joffrey, while having survived one of the biggest defeats for the royal army at Tumbleton, the fearful king was surprisingly doing well at not dying. He ducked and dodged, eyes rife with fear and movements sloppy and left with all kinds of openings. Next to him his uncle Tyrion Lannister. The imp was dressed in Lannister armor and wielded a double-edged axe he swung to perfection, taking the leg and soon enough life from a Dragonstone sergeant. Behind them a retinue of 50 Lannisters and Fox company men-at-arms rushed into clearly the fading Dragonstone presence with the help of Lady and his own skills at combat. The remaining men of Stannis' forces had either run or were cut down with extreme prejudice. Men crawled and dragged their bodies across the murky and sticky sand, while other put the dying men out of their misery. Naruto, Naruto, Naruto. The chant came slowly. Naruto, Naruto, Naruto. The prince in question looked upon the parapet, nodding softly at Brandon Stark and the archers that held faithful to their duty. Lannisters cheered for their lord's grandson, and the Fox company praised their commander, howling out his name like rabid animals. The battle had gone silent for a moment as explosions and raging fires had all but disappeared. Sansa barked as Lady, wagging her fluffy direwolf tail as she pounced around in circles, gaining a few laughs from the men and women present on the beach. Joff, Naruto panted, resting a hand on the king's shoulder. Good show. I could say the same to you. Joffrey laughed through deep pants. What now? The king asked his brother. I don't see Stannis anywhere. I don't know, Naruto replied, sheathing the sword he held. Stannis couldn't have escaped in the fight. Sansa felt something. She whined softly, trying to get Naruto's attention. She whined, but then began to bark, getting everyone's attention. She barked and howled. Even Naruto let go of his brother and knelt down to the direwolf's level. What is it, girl? Naruto asked worriedly. It was then that he heard it. Defensive positions. Naruto screamed a few pitches higher than usual. Joffrey's eyes went wide at his brother's fearful voice. Men rushed back and forth, picking up tower shields and broad shields, ready to brace for the coming onslaught. Darkness had taken control of the full northern side of the bay. None of them could see the force that came for them, but once they did, sweat rushed upon their brows like the waves of the Blackwater. Thousands of men sped up to them, swords, glaives, spears, axes, and pikes were wielded, and like the wave they crashed upon the shield wall with a power unlike anything before. The men and women of Fox company held their ground, dodging and even taking cuts and gashes in the defense of the mud gate. Spearheads rushed over the tower shields and broad shields, cutting their skin and unprotected faces. Men upon the walls and parapets rained upon the Dragonstone assault, leaving a sour taste in their mouths. With all their arrows and all their accuracy, it seemed to do very little against the sheer numbers they held. Fuck, Naruto cried, drawing his sword once again. They wading through the Blackwater break formation and rally to me instantaneously. The men broke the shield wall, jumping back and even trampling over the corpses left behind in their attempt to stay alive. Few were cut down and skewered, but at least 30 of the 50 made it to Naruto's side. They held their ground, spears, swords, and shields poised to deflect their enemies' attacks, and they were more than prepared to fight to the death. The Kingsguard stood firm next to Joffrey, holding their arming swords at the ready. Tyrion gripped his axe, spinning it in his hands, full and ripe with anticipation. Even Lady was bouncing on the soft pads of her paws. To Sansa, this was the most exhilarating fun she'd had in ages, but to Naruto he was a different story. Ser Loras, please be here. Ser Loras, please be here. Ser Loras horns. A cry came from the city. Banners, Tyrell, banners. It's Ser Loras. Tyrell and his host Naruto released the breath he didn't know he held, turning to face his new reinforcements. Ser Loras. Tyrell rode on the back of a bright white horse in his gorgeous custom armor. Next to him Ser Garland. Tyrell donned the armor of the late good King Renly. Behind them at the vanguard, Tyrell and Knights of the Reach were all he could see before him. The Dragonstone advance had come to a shuddering halt at the sudden intrusion. Joffrey and Tyrion looked to Naruto with knowing eyes as smiles slowly broke upon their faces, but Naruto knew that this wasn't all. If fate would have it, he would become the greatest strategist in the history of the Seven Kingdoms. Please don't let me down, don't let me down. Unbelievable, a voice came from the parapet. Once more Lannister banners in the rear. Lord Tywin Lannister has returned to King's Landing. Victory is ours. Naruto watched as little by little the men before him lost their numbers as Lannister and Tyrell came at the most perfect moment. Banners of golden roses on fields of green and the banners of golden lions of fields of crimson waved in the cooling winds of the aftermath. After Ser Loras had burst into the scene, the prince hadn't moved an inch, heart pounding and racing within his armored chest. Beside him Joffrey and Tyrion were just as awestruck. Naruto was even certain that Joffrey might have pissed himself, but with all the water and blood he was going to let it slide. Naruto sheathed his sword, giving Ser Loras a look of relief. Now Naruto spoke proudly. My uncle Stannis is upon the walls themselves, probably hiding and waiting for the moment to escape. Find him and bring him to me. Now that the battle was over, all that remained was the aftermath, but he still couldn't believe it. He'd survived, and now it is finished.